The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201. Bad news. Not surprisingly, Palmerstein's plan for a Jewish state met with unanimous opposition from all countries. Even the Ottoman Sultan Mejid, whom the British said was the biggest beneficiary, opposed the establishment of a Jewish state on his own land. Of course, the opinions of other countries did not make Britain intend to give up. They tried to contact organizations such as the Zionist Congress and the Freemasons, hoping to use the help of these organizations to move a large number of Jews directly into the Jerusalem area. This created a fait accompli, and it didn't matter, even if the five-nation conference disagreed, because Britain could completely use its powerful power to make rice cook. The British idea and beautiful promise of the Jewish state spread from one place to another through newspapers and businessmen, did attract many lower class and middle class Jews, and some of them planned to leave after the war in the Near East and North Africa ended. Syria gets the promised land. Franz didn't know much about this history, but he knew that the state of Israel was founded after World War II, so he was sure that Jewish statehood would not succeed. The Austrian aristocratic circle even held a handicap for this purpose. Franz originally wanted to make a fortune, but he found that the odds of the Jews successfully establishing a nation were pitifully low. Most of the nobles believed that the Jews would not be able to establish a foothold in the Syrian desert. Only a small number of Jews can succeed in suppressing the Jewish state. Even Solomon Rothschild, the backbone of Austrian Jewry, only paid a symbolic 1,000 florins. Franz could only sigh. It's really hard to make some extra money. Archduke Franz, your ability to make money is already very strong. No matter how powerful you are, you can only rob it. Ajani comforted with a smile. Rob, that's a good idea. The hills of Bactria in Afghanistan, shipwrecks in Spain, and temples in India are all good places to make money. However, due to limitations of technology and strength, these things cannot be visited for the time being. Do you really want to rob him? Ajani said as she raised her ears to Franz. Franz grabbed Ajani's ear and said, "You ask too many questions. Yeah, it hurts. Don't ask, Franz." Then let go of his hand. In fact, he didn't use too much force. It was just that Ajani was too devoted to her performance. Archduke Franz, there is good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Ajani said with a smile. Are you taking revenge on me? How dare you? Ajani said, covering her ears. Okay, let's hear the bad news first. Franz sighed. The sales volume of your improved pedal sewing machine has been poor. Except for a few nobles who have good relations with the family, almost no one cares about it. At this time, the sewing machine was still a very troublesome hand-operated sewing machine. It required two people to operate. One person shook the handle, and the other person put the fabric into it and operated it. It was also extremely easy to cause accidents. After all, it is impossible for two people to share the same brain, so they can only perform some simple mechanical sutures. Although the foot-operated sewing machine superficially changes only the driving method, it actually has a dimensionality reduction impact on the past hand-operated sewing machines. It greatly simplifies the operating process and enriches the operating methods, allowing it to be used in most applications instead of manual operation. But Franz didn't expect these people to be so ignorant. They only retailed less than 10 units every month, but his mother purchased 1,000 units at this time. The price of an old-fashioned hand-operated sewing machine was 250 florins, and the pedal sewing machine modified by Franz only cost 300 florins. Franz felt that the price increase of only 50 florins was already a very good deal. However, after half a year, only 69 units were sold in retail. After deducting costs and other expenses, only 12,000 florins were earned. The 1,000 units purchased by Mrs. Sophie were all taken at cost price, and Franz did not make a penny from this business. As for the patent fees, there is not even a penny. Ajani, didn't you say that the sewing machine is very useful? Franz asked. It's very easy to use. I don't know how many times faster it is than doing it by hand. Jenny replied, point in fact, someone has calculated that, if the material is soft or thin, the speed of the sewing machine is almost 15 times that of manual sewing. Point. If the material is hard or thick, the sewing machine speed is more than 30 times that of manual work. Then, why can't it be sold? Franz asked. It always takes time for people to accept new things, and the price is indeed a bit expensive. But it is indeed a great invention. Don't be discouraged. People who have used it say it is good. Jenny explained. It's been half a year. Just for civilians. Don't those tailor shops have any foresight? Franz said angrily. Point in fact, a sewing machine will be called one of the 4 major items, not to mention it now. Even a century from now. It is normal that ordinary people cannot afford it. But the owners and professionals of the tailor shops were actually unwilling to spend money to buy them, which made Franz very chilled. Point is, it really like what is said in the book that if you have a first mover advantage, you won't be willing to update the equipment so that it will become obsolete until it is eliminated by the times. Thinking of this, Franz couldn't help but start to worry about the future of the Austrian Empire. Point at this time, Jenny said, but the tailors in the shop usually don't visit noble shops. Noble store. Well, that's right. Many families run their own shops, and the royal family is no exception. But because of Mrs. Sophie's relationship, our products can be sold in several noble shops. For example, Elt Hazy Windish Gretz. Maybe we can hire some people to sell it, or try our luck at a general store. General store? Franz didn't quite understand the word. It's a relatively large-scale store with a wide range of varieties. The people who run this kind of store are usually Jewish merchants. If you put your products in, they may be used by people with malicious intentions to create some non-existent rumors. AGRN, I said worriedly. Point. After listening to Ajana's words, Franz realized that there were no supermarkets in this era. Point. However, it is a bit difficult to open a supermarket, and it will take away business from ordinary people. Maybe department stores are a good choice. Point. Department stores pay more attention to image than supermarkets and have higher profit margins, but they are still much cheaper than the products in contemporary stores in this era, restricted by transportation, storage and other conditions. The business model of shopping malls is destined to be more profit oriented. Point. Maybe he suddenly figured out the reason and felt happy. Or maybe he was always being teased and wanted to fight back. Franz put his arms around Ajana's neck and kissed her on the cheek. Point. It smells like aloe vera. This is all because Franz said that aloe vera has a whitening effect, so the aloe vera in the royal garden suffered. Ajani would break the aloe vera after getting up early and before going to bed every day. Point. But Franz thought about it and decided that it was okay. At least she wouldn't use arsenic trioxide on her face. Otherwise, Franz will end up like Mrs. White's dog one day. Point. In 1888, a tragedy occurred in New York, USA. A noble lady found her pet dog dead when she woke up in the morning. For this reason, she offered a reward of $10,000 to the person who poisoned her dog. Point. This incident not only shocked New York, but even detectives throughout the United States were eager to try. Point. Finally, under the analysis of a group of famous detectives, it was concluded that the cause of death of the dog was that it licked Mrs. White's face and was poisoned by cosmetics. It was completely different from what Franz thought. Not only did Ajani have no reaction when Franz kissed her, but it was as if nothing happened after the kiss. Chapter 202. Good news. Ajani, do you have a larger shop in my name on a busier street? No. Ajani answered simply. Didn't you sell all the shops in the city last year and replace them with ones outside the city? Franz then remembered that after Vienna suffered floods in history, the Austrian government carried out large-scale urban reconstruction. Point. Franz originally wanted to take advantage of this urban expansion opportunity to make a lot of money. At that time, the price difference between the land prices in the inner city and the outer city was nearly 7 times. However, due to the cash for work program implemented by Franz, the embankments throughout Vienna were reinforced and many roads were rebuilt, so everyone was living well and forgot about the renovation. Franz scratched his head. It seems that he really can't flap his wings randomly, otherwise he really doesn't know what direction the world will develop in. Kerntenstrasse, Grabenstrasse, Mischstrasse, Hilferstrasse. These 4 streets are very good, especially Hilferstrasse. As you said, with the development of the railway, it changed from a slum to a phoenix nest. Looking at Ajani's expression, you can tell that she must have been prepared. How many shops do I have on these 4 streets? Franz asked. Ajani raised her chin in a pretentious manner. How much? Tell me. This time it was Franz's turn to hug someone's arms and act coquettishly, but he still felt that he had earned a lot. Except Graben Street. I bought all the other 3 streets. You can buy as much as you want, so I just bought them all. Ajani was able to buy these 3 streets, not only because she had the money, but also because of Mrs. Sophie's face. The only way to purchase these lands is Mrs. Sophie. If it were Ajani who went there is a high probability that she would not succeed. Instead, she would be questioned, and some opponents would even shoot her. Awesome, you have such a keen eye. Franz pointed at the map and said, now he has 3 of the 4 most profitable streets in Vienna. Once Vienna starts to renovate, the price of these lands can definitely double. You haven't said what you want to do yet. Archduke Franz, do you want to open a general store? Ajani has roughly guessed what Franz wants to do. You're right, but it's not just a general store, it's a department store. Department store, that's right. It's not a large grocery store like those opened by Jews. A shopping mall needs to be luxurious, stylish, and all-inclusive. Franz explained. A very large luxury grocery store? Ajani smiled. Although Franz was not satisfied with this explanation, it was actually the case. The area near the train station has developed extremely rapidly in recent years, and people from out of town have more money in their pockets and more desire to shop. That makes sense, Franz said. How about driving on Silver Street? Ajani gave a suggestion without any trace, and at the same time, conducted a wave of rational analysis. Yeah, okay. Franz then realized that he had fallen into passivity again without knowing it. Ajani's own language, movements, and ability to do things are impeccable. When people feel comfortable with her, they always can't help but think about other things. Well, I will go find Mr. Sinner tomorrow. He is a very talented businessman, and I think he will be able to give some useful advice. Ajani said. Mr. Sinner, the former president of the Vienna Chamber of Commerce and Industry who was promoted by Franz, is the sworn enemy of the Rothschild family. Well, if he can't solve it, if you have any problems, go to me. If you have trouble, go to my mother. Do you understand? Franz said. Yes. Ajani nodded. Then, you haven't said the good news yet? Franz asked. The sales of rubber shoes are very good. The military plans to purchase 1 million pairs at a time, and the Imperial government also plans to purchase 2 million pairs, because Franz preemptively registered vulcanized rubber technology. He set up a shoe factory. By the way, a pair of qualified leather shoes in this era cost 11 florins, and even inferior grain shoes with cork soles wrapped in linen cost 5 florins thanks to the advent of the sewing machine. Franz's rubber shoes cost only 2 florins even when sold for 3 florins. The price was far lower than that of contemporaries' handmade shoes. Strictly speaking, there were no shoemaking factories in this era, and shoes were usually custom made by shoemakers. Dozens of processes for a pair of shoes are all completed by the same person, so the efficiency is naturally much lower. Not only the price, but also the performance and practicality of rubber shoes completely surpassed the shoes of the same period. Rubber soles have good wear resistance, non-slip, elasticity, not easy to break, good softness, good extensibility, stable shrinkage, good bending, and waterproof. So many? This really shocked Franz. Yes, there will be more in the future, because many soldiers said that these are the best shoes they have ever worn, and the price is more acceptable to ordinary people. I believe that in the near future, everyone in Austria will be able to wear shoes. Ajani said. In this era, there are many people who cannot afford to wear shoes. Many people don't wear shoes when working, or even climbing mountains. They only wear shoes when they go to the city. In the rural areas of Austria, homemade straw sandals are the mainstream. However, although straw sandals are cheap, they are not wear resistant and easy to break. What's worse is that they rub the feet and can easily cause a lot of wounds on the feet, often causing bloody wounds. Very scary. Generally speaking, wearing straw sandals requires a pair of thick socks. However, Thick socks are not cheap and can be easily worn by the straw sandals in this era. There is still a lack of anti-inflammatory drugs. Once infection occurs at the breach, tragedy can easily occur. How many pairs of shoes can we make every day now? Franz felt that the quantity was too large, and he was afraid that production capacity would be insufficient. Before, there were less than 1,000 pairs per day. After purchasing 1,000 sewing machines, we can now make 20,000 pairs per day. Jenny answered, "Great. This is really good news. I think we can continue to expand production capacity. After all, there are still many people in the Austrian Empire who cannot afford to wear shoes. We can also open up overseas markets." Franz was thinking about his wonderful future plan. However, Jenny poured cold water on him. Archduke. "Franz, now we have a problem." "What's the problem?" Franz had a bad feeling. "Our rubber inventory is insufficient. Counting this year's imports, we still have a gap of 1,000 tons. Brazil said that, if they still want rubber, they have to send people to the depths of the rainforest, and then they cannot pay the price of 450 florins. Calculator." Jenny hesitated. "How much do they want?" Franz knew that he would be choked by the damn Brazilian guy. 1,000 florins per ton. Otherwise they wouldn't risk their lives tapping rubber. Jenny said, "The premium is 120%. Why don't they grab it? The rubber tappers are obviously slaves, but they are said to be risking their lives." Franz was angry, but he was powerless, because at this time, only Brazil produced natural rubber in the world. Historically, in 1839, the sales volume of natural rubber in the world was only 200 tons. France has been hoarding rubber, so now Brazil's rubber production has more than doubled to 500 tons. But France suddenly received a huge order, directly exceeding the Brazilian production limit. At this time, France had only two choices: either pay the money honestly and complete the order, or postpone the order to next year and wait for the price of rubber to drop before buying. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203, The Third Way. It's just that Franz didn't want to choose either of the two paths before him. Franz first tried to use the desulfurization method to reshape the leftover scraps from shoemaking. Due to the limitations of the technological level at this time, doing so would only cost more money, so he had to give up. After that, Franz tried to make a fuss from the source, using special molds to utilize the rubber most efficiently. Of course, it failed again. It was still the same old problem, lack of pre-production technology. Just when Franz was at a loss, Ajana's negotiations came to fruition. The Brazilians decided to give in. They were willing to sell 1,000 tons of rubber at 500 florins per ton. This made Franz feel very hurt. In fact, he now hopes that the Brazilians will raise the price of rubber as high as possible. Because at this time, the Austrian rubber industry already had a first mover advantage. If the cost is increased at this time, it will undoubtedly greatly increase the threshold for entry, which will reduce competitors and maintain Austria's leading position. At the same time, it can also delay the modernization process of other countries' industries, and the increase in rubber prices will also help Brazilians expand production capacity. Historically, Brazilians were too lazy. It was not until the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that rubber production reached 18,000 tons at the same time, just in time for the great development of the automobile industry. The rubber crisis occurred. At the peak of the crisis, the price of rubber reached $6,600 per ton, and even after the crisis, it remained above £1,000, $5,000, for a long time. It even forced Europeans to find places to grow rubber on their own. In the end, it was only with the support of our people that the rubber crisis was completely resolved. At that time, the United States Spain and other countries defrauded a large eastern country of a large amount of money to invest in rubber production. It was not until a large number of rubber plantations were established in Southeast Asia that the world's rubber shortage problem was solved. If Brazil's rubber production remains as low as in history, not even the Austrian Empire will be able to supply it to the whole world. Franz just returned to the study. Failure followed, and Ajani quietly closed the door. As soon as Franz sat down, Talia and Ajani burst into laughter. They were obviously laughing at the previous conversation between Franz and Oshiyasuji. "Don't laugh," said Franz. "Why? Are you going to brainwash us too?" Haha. Thalia and Ajani opened their arms together, and Franz had no choice but to look away and ignore them. However, they did not want to let Franz go. Thalia and Ajani hugged each other and spoke in a deliberately raised tone. "Oh, my dear, let the world feel your pain. I will give you the power you want. Come and drink from the cup of hatred. Have you had enough fun? Don't roll around on my bed." Franz said slightly helplessly. Thalia regained her composure and said, "Why didn't you bring Miss Shania in with you? She seems to admire you very much. Why should I take her with me? And seeing that her grades are pretty good, I want to know where she can go. If Oshiyasuji really has any talent in science and technology, I would rather she stay in Austria." Franz explained. "Then, what do you think of Miss Alina? She is also very smart and beautiful. Although she is a Jew, her loyalty to the royal family is as good as anyone's." Thalia said. "Miss Thalia, you are the principal of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna. You should be a gardener, not a. Even the stupidest farmer will not do such a thing as destroying seedlings to encourage growth." Franz said. "Those children are still young, and so is Franz. They are still in the learning stage. We still need to see their development. It is not too late to make a decision in the future." Ajani made a rescue. Syria, Berat. As soon as the Austrian reinforcement arrived at the port, they were warmly welcomed by the British troops. General Gablenz even doubted whether this was a city in urgent need of rescue. Looking at the spotless uniforms and the magnificent military band of the British Navy, General Gablenz felt that he was just attending a party, not a military rescue operation. Fortunately, General Gablenz was used to ridiculous things. During the Mexican War, General Gablenz had been sent to Mexico together with Count Stadion as Tazanana's military advisor, and even served as a Mexican general for a period of time. However, with the end of the Mexican Civil War, they also got the opportunity to return home. General Gablenz did not have as strong a background as Count Stadion, and could not directly become the governor of a province. He could only lead his troops across the ocean to Beirut to gain a future for himself. At this time, Gablenz had 3,000 Austrian Expeditionary Force soldiers in his hands. His mission was to cooperate with the British in fighting in Egypt. Although Prince Metternich asked him to preserve his strength as much as possible, both he and the Austrian military hoped to perform well. Press the British head up. However, Gablenz soon received desperate news from the British. Egypt had 130,000 troops in Syria. The gap in strength between the two could no longer be described by the word disparity. It was simply clouds and mud. Judgment. What's even more frightening is that the British admiral in front of him wants to drag him to drink as soon as they meet. The heartless British guy is about to blow up General Gablenz, and he needs a good drink to calm it down. While changing cups, William Simond revealed to Gablenz that the situation in Beirut at this time was far less critical than the battle report said. Although the total strength of the Egyptians is 130,000, only about 70,000 can actually fight. 50,000 of them are confronting the Ottoman army on the northern front. The remaining 20,000 are besieging Beirut, and there are about 60,000 auxiliary troops delivering supplies and maintaining law and order. General Gablenz rested in Beirut for a night under the influence of alcohol. When he arrived at the fortress outside the city the next day, he found that British Army soldiers were eating potatoes. Colonel Carter Wine of the British Army received him very warmly, but he had nothing to offer, so he had to peel a potato for himself and sprinkle a little cumin and salt on it. Gablenz thought again of the looking at the stars he had eaten last night. Although that dish was a bit scary, it was not as shabby as the British Army. In addition, he also discovered a very strange scene. The British clearly only had one regiment, but they had nearly 50 cannons. This was really unusual. You must know that at this time, European countries generally had the firepower of an army, which was 50 to 70 artillery pieces later. Gablenz found out that these artillery pieces were originally lent to the army by the Royal Navy. Of course, these guns were not borrowed for free. The army had to use their supplies to replace them. So now Colonel Carter can only eat potatoes. The 3,000 men brought by Gablenz, plus the 2,000 men brought by Colonel Carter. The combined total of the coalition forces was only 5,000. Seeing the corpses on the ground on the battlefield ahead, he couldn't help but start to worry about his future. He even doubted whether his men could survive the fierce battle in the future. Colonel Carter, you are such a brave man. In such a lonely city in such a fierce battle, you actually persisted for 20 days. It is really admirable. You misunderstood. The Egyptians have no habit of collecting the corpses of their companions. Anyway, those corpses will be buried by the sand sooner or later. As for the battle, there has never been a real battle here. Colonel Carter replied, how do you say this? Gablenz was a little confused. The morale and discipline of the Egyptians are extremely poor. As soon as the guns are fired, they will flee in large areas, followed by unilateral massacres. I have been stationed here for more than half a month, and only 160 of my soldiers died. The total number of Egyptian troops killed and captured has long exceeded 10,000. Colonel Carter said with some pride. If Colonel Carter's words were told to other European generals, they would definitely accuse Carter of bragging. But Gablenz had seen even more outrageous fighting during the Mexican Civil War. If the American army is a bunch of rabble, then the Mexican army is simply a bunch of street gangsters. The Egyptian army, which has been excluded from Western civilization, is certainly not as good as the Mexicans. This is also true. Ibrahim responded as soon as he learned that Beirut had been lost. He personally led an army of 20,000 people, facing Beirut with only 2,000 lobster soldiers. He wanted to win a quick victory. But what Ibrahim didn't expect was that he suffered unimaginable setbacks here. He originally wanted to lure the opponent into a decisive battle, and took the opportunity to send the Death Army, a barbarian army that claimed not to be afraid of death, to outflank the opponent's retreat, and then completely annihilate it. Since the Syrian battlefield lacked sufficient mobile troops, he could only use infantry instead of cavalry. But the result was that their elite troops were suppressed by the firepower of the lobster soldiers in the front, and suffered heavy losses. The Death Army responsible for the encirclement was defeated by the bayonets of the lobster soldiers, and fled after leaving more than 100 corpses. There were 3,000 members of the Death Army, and the death rate was less than 5%. Their morale had completely collapsed. Later, Ibrahim also tried to directly attack Beirut City, but those volunteers from the Royal Navy in Beirut City were not vegetarians. Not only did it fail to achieve any results, but the British also annihilated many effective forces, because their forces were too dispersed. Now he can only temporarily recruit auxiliary troops to continue the siege of Beirut. After Ibrahim learned the news that the Egyptian navy was completely wiped out in the Battle of Beirut, he drank every day to drown his sorrows. He once remonstrated with his father, Muhammad Ali, begging for peace, but was reprimanded. Ali blamed Ibrahim for not taking Istanbul, which gave the Ottomans a chance to breathe, and invited foreign aid to destroy Egypt's maritime power. Ibrahim, on the other hand, felt that Ali should have sent all his fleets from the beginning and headed straight to Istanbul instead of fantasizing about defeating Britain and Russia and becoming the world's hegemon. Since the Egyptian attack was thwarted, the Ottomans organized a counterattack. Letters asking for help piled up on Ibrahim's desk like snowflakes. There was nothing he could do at this moment, because the coast of Egypt was plundered by the Austrian navy, and Ali refused to support the Syrian battlefield. In addition, the effect of the Imperial edict was very significant, just like Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. The Ottoman army recruited a large number of ethnic minority soldiers in a short period of time. The most terrifying thing is the resistance of the people at the bottom. Ali's brutal rule has long made the civilians complain. They constantly organize guerrillas to harass the Egyptian army's supply lines, and even pass information to the British and Ottoman armies. Just when Ibrahim was at his wit's end, his adjutant suddenly came in and reported, "The British and Austrian coalition forces have moved. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace Point." Just when the war in Beirut was about to break out, Franz received Friedrich's letter. Friedrich complained crazily in the letter about Franz's Congreve rocket point during the previous sneak attack on the Egyptian navy. This thing did more damage to the Austrian army than the Egyptian navy. The longest range can reach 4 kilometers, but the radius of the error range can actually reach as much as 2 kilometers. What's more terrible is that the flames and hot gases ejected by rocket launches often burn soldiers and even ignite ships. Franz rubbed his forehead. Rockets could not be used for precise strikes even in World War II. To continue improving accuracy, Franz thought of a rodless spin design point. However, this kind of rocket has higher technical requirements and must use a launcher. At the same time, it also needs the help of a hydraulic press during production. Otherwise mass production cannot be achieved. After some investigation, I found that Austria does have hydraulic presses, but they are mostly used to squeeze vegetable oil, and the power is too low. What surprised Franz even more was that Austrian industry still used hydraulic forging hammers. It was obvious that steam hammers should be used in the steam era. In fact, the reason is very simple. That is, Austria has a dense network of rivers, large cutting height differences, and abundant water resources. Compared with spending money to buy expensive steam forging hammers, simple, cheap and widely available hydraulic forging hammers are more popular. As for the hydraulic press, it is considered that it can only squeeze oil and is not used in industrial production at all. Franz knew nothing about these construction machinery. He only knew that hydraulic presses would play a huge role in industry and military in the future. So he could only throw out a general topic and leave it to Austrian scientists to solve it. But Franz knew one thing. The hydraulic press really started to develop because an engineer mistakenly thought oil was water and added it to the hydraulic press, which greatly improved the efficiency and really attracted attention. Soon the first oil-water mixing hydraulic press was born, and what Franz never expected was that the first experiment with this hydraulic press was actually used by Doppler's daughter to press coffee beans, which indirectly led to the birth of instant coffee. Under the night, the Mediterranean Sea was pitch black, with only the sea breeze blowing violently. Friedrich was sitting on his flagship, the third-class battleship Venus, looking at Alexandria in the distance, the richest city in Egypt. Alexandria was a fortified city, but precisely because it was a fortified city, its defenders were more likely to slack off. To be honest, Venetians are really professional counterparts when it comes to being pirates. Coupled with the instigation of the Caramanli family, many tribal elders who had long been dissatisfied with Ali's brutal rule took the opportunity to cooperate with the Austrian navy's actions, and for a while Egypt was wailing. Muhammad Ali's excessive consumption of opium and wine, coupled with successive blows, made his temper even more violent, and he executed 2 Alexander governors one after another. Ali believed that today's situation was entirely caused by the governor of Alexandria's negligence, so he vented his anger on the 2 unlucky men. The replacement of 4 governors in a row made the defenders of Alexandria panic. The new governor, Al said, did not want to die in an unknown manner, so he searched for money everywhere. As soon as he took office, Friedrich List, then US Secretary of State, promised Al said that, as long as he paid $10,000, he would send a ship to pick him up and accept him as a US citizen. Friedrich List also assured Al said that, as long as he became an American citizen, he would be protected by American law and Muhammad Ali would no longer be able to sanction him. In fact, in order to generate income, Friedrich List also extended the same invitation to many senior Egyptian officials. Chapter 204 Battle of Beirut, Syria. Beirut. Gab Lenz thought the British must be crazy to take the initiative. He really couldn't figure out how 5,000 people could attack a position defended by 20,000 people. What was the difference between this and risking death? However, as a representative of the Austrian military, he could not be timid and had to behave like a real soldier. In fact, the Egyptians were also in a hurry. They did not expect that the British army, which had been besieged for more than half a month, would actually have reinforcement, and they did not expect that the coalition forces would choose to fight out of the city. Only Ibrahim, the coach of Egypt, even shouted, "God has appeared." He felt that this was a God-given opportunity. Although taking Beirut could not change the situation of the war, he could use the British and the fleet as hostages to prepare for the war. Egypt sought better surrender terms, but he was the only one who was happy. Most of the Egyptian soldiers could no longer fill their stomachs, and they felt bleak about the prospect of victory. At best, a siege like this will result in starvation. Once the two sides exchange fire on the frontal battlefield, they will go to the battlefield like their dead compatriots. The battle broke out. First, the Egyptians fired artillery at the British troops, who came out of the fortress. But unlike imagination, the British did not line up waiting to be shot. The British and Austrian skirmishers who came out first had little impact on the Egyptian bombardment. After all, the distance between the two sides is still thousands of meters. If you want to hit a target the size of a person with a cannon of this era, unless it is God, point immediately afterwards. The coalition's artillery also began to fire. Most of the long-barreled heavy cannons used by the British were large caliber and powerful, using special high-explosive shells. Shells whizzed past the heads of the Egyptians' ranks, scaring them so much that they either fell to the ground or turned and ran away. However, they soon discovered that few of those shells landed among the crowd. Just as they were congratulating themselves on escaping, a huge explosion came from the Egyptian artillery position. The Egyptian artilleryman hit by the 32-pound long-barreled cannon instantly turned into a pile of minced meat scattered everywhere. Even the steel was blown into pieces, and a 30 centimeters deep crater even appeared on the ground. Immediately afterwards, countless artillery shells landed on the Egyptian artillery position one after another. The power of this large caliber long-barreled cannon was astonishing, and the power of the explosion of high explosive shells was also terrifying. However, after the smoke dissipated, the Egyptian soldiers discovered that they had not blown up a few cannons and killed a few people. This is the case with cannons of this era. Compared with bombarding infantry, they are more suitable for sieges and naval operations, and attack larger targets with direct fire. Because its shooting angle is small and its trajectory is straight, its accuracy is higher. However, with the artillery at this time, shooting infantry at a distance of 1,000 meters is similar to anti-aircraft guns shooting mosquitoes. However, the Egyptian soldiers were not happy for long before the coalition skirmishers started shooting. The skirmishers on both sides are elite. The British skirmishers are from the Scottish Highland Infantry Regiment. They use the most advanced front-loading musket in the world in this era, the Brunswick 1838 percussion gun, which is only equipped by a very small number of troops in the UK. Got this rifle. The Braunschweig rifle is certainly not as famous as the famous Brown Bess, but its iconic double ring-grooved rifling and special bullets must be impressive. There are convex grooves on both sides of its bullet, and it needs to be inserted into the groove when loading. Although it looks cumbersome, it is highly accurate and easy to clean, which is a major improvement in the history of muzzle-loading rifles. The Austrian skirmishers were also elite, and they also had the best rifles in the Austrian Empire. However, compared with the British Braunschweig, they instantly fell out of favor. The skirmishers of the coalition army were all elite soldiers, with accurate marksmanship and courage. As the gunshots sounded, people continued to fall in the Egyptian ranks, but Ibrahim ordered his soldiers not to fight back. Instead, he ordered the large troops to retreat, sent skirmishers to attack, and used artillery fire to put as much pressure on the enemy skirmishers as possible. Ibrahim went to France and learned Napoleon's tactics of columns and skirmishers. However, he felt that now was not the time to make a desperate move, because all the coalition line infantry had not yet come out of the fortress. Of course, he would not let his troops suffer too many casualties before attacking. Using skirmishers to fight skirmishers was the wisest choice in theory. But Ibrahim forgot one thing. His so-called skirmishers were just ordinary infantrymen holding rifles. Most of the skirmishers in the coalition were veterans who had experienced hundreds of battles, or hunters who had grown up in the mountains and forests. The exchange of fire between the skirmishers soon turned into a one-sided massacre. Most of the Egyptian skirmishers wearing turbans were quickly knocked down, while the remaining ones did not dare to stand and reload ammunition, and lay down one after another, fall to the ground. There was a generation gap between the Cholville rifle itself and the weapons of the coalition forces, and lying on the ground to load ammunition greatly slowed down the loading speed. Soon, a considerable number of the Egyptian soldiers who lay down to try to avoid bullets could no longer stand up. woke up. At this time, the morale of the Egyptian skirmishers collapsed, and Ibrahim threw the scimitar in his hand to the ground. Let the death army send these cowards to hell. Those who backslide, die. Following an order, a group of Sudanese natives rushed towards the fleeing Egyptian skirmishers with swords and spears. Although the Egyptian skirmishers had guns in their hands, they were out of bullets at this time, and they were not much different from fire sticks. Theoretically, in this case, they had only two choices when facing the Sudanese natives rushing up, either to escape or to fight for their lives, but these Egyptian skirmishers chose to kneel down and beg for mercy. This was a certain death path. The Sudanese natives could not understand what the Egyptians were saying. Just hearing the pop sound of the blade cutting through the human body and the spear piercing the human body, those poor Egyptian skirmishers fell into the yellow sand. But the Sudanese natives didn't feel like it was enough, so they began to trample on the corpses of the dead, cut off their hands, feet, and heads, and held them high above their heads to show off their achievements. This behavior made the allied skirmishers, especially the Austrian skirmishers who had never seen such a scene, feel nauseated. Do they all fight like this? Captain Moho said subconsciously, and then he realized that he was next to a British skirmisher. The other person couldn't understand his German and could only smile awkwardly. So Captain Mojo took advantage of the time to change bullets, went to the back, and shouted to two Austrian skirmishers, "It's disgusting for these Africans to fight. It's a pity that the two skirmishers couldn't understand his German, so they could only reply in very poor German, I don't understand. This situation is common in the Austrian army. Generally speaking, soldiers only have three things in common: eating, sleeping and women." General Gablens put away the telescope in his hand and said to Colonel Carter beside him, "Ah, these African cannibals. It's so scary. It's hard to imagine how you survived the attack of these savages." Colonel Carter shook his head. "Look at it. They are one of the few jokes on this battlefield." Chapter 205 Battle of Beirut. When Ibrahim saw those deserters being cut into pieces by the Sudanese natives, instead of feeling fear or nausea, Ibrahim felt very excited. At this time, he discovered that the distance between the coalition infantry and skirmishers was still far away. If he had a cavalry in hand, he could cause huge damage to those skirmishers. It's just that Egypt originally lacked cavalry, and the only camels were used to transport supplies and support the northern front line, so he was so passive in the face of these skirmishers at this time. The closest people to the coalition skirmishers were the Sudanese natives, so Ibrahim was ready to completely sacrifice these natives who disappointed him so much. Ibrahim ordered the death army to charge. He thought it would be great if these natives could replace the coalition skirmishers. In this way, when all the coalition troops leave the fortress, he can charge in columns. European tactics during this period advocated offense, believing that only by taking the initiative to attack can we take the initiative in the war and win victory. France is the birthplace of this kind of thinking. Ibrahim's studies in France made him believe that offense is the true meaning of war on the battlefield. As the horns from behind urged people to advance, the Sudanese natives gasped and looked at each other. The Sudanese natives only had simple leaves and animal skins on their bodies. Their plump muscles were exposed, and their eyes exuded a bloodthirsty red light. As the first Sudanese native roared and rushed in the direction of the coalition forces, countless natives followed his footsteps, screaming and rushing towards the coalition skirmishers. As soon as the skirmishers saw this formation, they picked up their guns and ran towards their own line of infantry. They knew very well that if they were caught up by the Sudanese natives, they would definitely end up being hacked to pieces. Gablen stomped his feet when he looked at the rear. His own line infantry moved too slowly. The main reason was the lack of effective communication channels between the coalition forces, which resulted in unnecessary congestion, which caused the skirmishers to become disconnected from the line. Being able to see such a small gap proved that the opponent's general was by no means mediocre. At this time, he began to regret listening to the British man's advice. In fact, in history, General Gablens was not a coward. On the contrary, he was a ruthless man who dared to lead the infantry charge with a saber. It was just that the pressure on him from Metternich and Count Latter before the war was too great. Both regarded this battle as a key battle related to the face of the Austrian Empire. Point of course, the two sides have completely different views. Prince Metternich hopes that he can preserve his strength as much as possible, while Count Latterer hopes that he can cause as much damage as possible. Historically, in 1839, Gablenz was still an unknown major in the Lombardy region. However, due to Franz's intervention, the Austrian War Ministry selected him as a military observer to Mexico. After the Mexican War, rewards were given based on merit, and Gablenz was moved to a position he shouldn't be in, so he worried about gains and losses. Colonel Carter was also a little surprised. These Sudanese natives were very timid before. They ran away when they saw cannons, muzzles, and bayonets. How could they be so brave today? Could it be that Egypt was acting before? But the play was too realistic. When the Egyptian soldiers saw how brave the Sudanese natives were, they couldn't help shouting. But suddenly some of the Sudanese natives who rushed halfway lost their weapons, and then other natives also threw away their weapons. Just when both sides were confused, the natives suddenly raised their hands and shouted in broken English, "I surrender." This move of kneeling down and surrendering made both sides unable to hold their nerve. So the commander-in-chief of both sides ordered the large troops to advance, and the war was about to break out. The coalition forces used traditional rows and skirmishers, while Ibrahim used Napoleonic columns and skirmishers. Coupled with the Charleville rifles in their hands, it was simply the French African division. Some people here must have questions. Why did the coalition forces just defeat the Egyptian skirmishers? And now where did Ibrahim get the skirmisher line? In fact, this is very simple. The Egyptian skirmishers are just ordinary infantrymen holding rifles. Let the line infantry take rifled guns to replace the fallen skirmishers. This is what Ibrahim did. Of course, you don't need to guess the combat effectiveness of the skirmisher line. They were quickly defeated by the coalition skirmishers. The Egyptian army charging in columns also received heavy attention from artillery fire. This time the cannons were replaced with solid bullets. The scorching iron ball flew out of the barrel and hit the Egyptian ranks. The shells brought out a thick line of blood in the Egyptian ranks. Like bowling balls, the British army concentrated all their artillery to bombard the Egyptian queue. This heavy artillery used in naval battles was too terrifying for the infantry. As long as one is hit by a shell from this 32-pound cannon, even if it hits the hands and feet, the person can be lifted up completely and then fall to the ground like a puddle of mud. If it is directly hit on the torso or head, it will cause a bloody storm and make the surrounding comrades lose their sanity. Before those Egyptian soldiers, who were lucky enough not to be hit by solid shells, had time to rejoice, the 8-pounder howitzer brought by the Austrians opened fire. As an artillery specially designed to deal with infantry, the Egyptians were also kindly equipped with shrapnel, a terrifying weapon. Although this artillery shell was invented by the British, the Austrians only bought one shell and copied it, and gave it a new name, shrapnel. It is common for countries to plagiarize weapons designs from each other. The British Patent Office would not be established until 1852. At this time, it was simply impossible to protect rights across borders. That's why countless time travelers rushed to the UK to register patents. In fact, patent law in this era has always been domestic law, not international law. The first worldwide intellectual property rights organization had to wait until the end of the 19th century. As shrapnel exploded in the air, countless small steel balls shot at the poor Egyptian soldiers. Some people wanted to reach out to block them, but it was in vain. Countless small steel balls were embedded in their bodies. Those Egyptian soldiers who were shot were lucky if they died on the spot. Otherwise it would be extremely difficult to remove the steel balls embedded in their bodies. Even if they were removed, there was a high probability that they would die from postoperative infection and would have to suffer for several more days. Those Egyptian soldiers who survived the 2 bombardments were called out one by the skirmishers. Soon the ground was covered with Egyptian corpses. In order to prevent the morale of the army from collapsing, Ibrahim could only order the supervisory team to kill all sides behind. But even if the supervising team has killed a river of blood, it still can't stop the fleeing soldiers in front. What's even more frightening is that the coalition infantry is approaching step by step and has spread out in a fan shape. There is no doubt that the next battle will be a fierce battle. A massacre point at this time. The disadvantage of the Egyptian side was infinite, and Ibrahim did not understand why it was defeated so miserably. He clearly used Napoleon's tactics and the soldiers used French equipment, but he could only swallow the bitter fruit of failure. In fact, Napoleon once said, unless there is superior artillery, a column cannot break through a horizontal column. Chapter 206 Franz and his friends. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. In an open space in the royal garden, a group of young people were sitting together as the teenagers cheered. Franz lifted a taller boy high above his head and threw him hard. The tall young man who fell on the soft mat immediately got up and said that he had surrendered. His name was Adolf von Lebstein, the eldest grandson of Count Korolaf and the future Lebstein. The 12-year-old Adolf was taller and stronger than Franz, and he was not the first person to challenge Franz. However, he still did not last long before he was lifted up by Franz due to the lack of entertainment items at that time. Pastimes such as horse riding and hunting were obviously not suitable for young people. Instead, a group of teenagers getting together to fight and wrestle became a form of entertainment. Of course, there are rules for playing rough. No one is allowed to penetrate the eyes, pick the crotch, or use weapons. Traditional nobles believe that this can train boys' courage. It's just that Franz's martial virtue is obviously excessive. Adolf, who lasted the longest in 6 consecutive battles, only lasted 25 seconds. Even Captain Perish and his royal guards, who were responsible for safety and protection, felt that surprise. Although Franz practiced Sanda for a long time before traveling through time, he never forgot to exercise after arriving in this world. But he knew very well that a child could not achieve this level of power. The only explanation was that, after traveling through time, he brought more than just memories. How about you two? Come up 2 by 2. Franz hooked his hand. Richard Metternich stood up and was about to rush towards Franz, while someone behind him was using his cover to rush towards Franz. Franz did not panic when faced with attacks from both sides. Instead, he rushed towards Richard. At the moment when the two sides came into contact, he turned around and twisted his back and threw him in one go, using the opponent's momentum to throw him away. Edward Taffy, who was about to attack from behind, was knocked to the ground by Richard when his vision went dark. Franz stepped on Richard's chest, and Richard, who was unable to get up, pressed on Taffy's body, making the latter unable to get up. The female attendants not far away were standing or sitting, and they all exclaimed, "Is anyone still playing?" Franz asked. The teenagers sitting around shook their heads. The young men in front of him are the playmates prepared by Franz. Second for Franz. They are all queens of famous families, and most of them are the future heirs of their respective families. The old man's intention was obvious, that is, to give Franz a team of his own. It's just that this kind of behavior is too childish in Franz's eyes. Of course, he won't blame the old man. After all, there is more than 1 or 2 generations between the two. In addition to Adolf Lebsteinsky, Richard Metternich, and Edward Taft, there are also Kronini Wilberg, Winglas Watson, Luca and Blas among them. Colonnini and Wengris are both descendants of military nobles. Luca Ambras' family is very influential in Italy, and his 2 uncles are both local bishops. Franz didn't have much interest in this kind of children's game. When he saw everyone shaking their heads, he was ready to return to his seat, ready to let them play freely and send them away after dinner. However, you never guess what the kids are planning to do. Want to play cake fight? Waste of food. How about going boating? Too dangerous. Otherwise, let's compete to see whose nanny is better. Great. Agree. Vulgar. But Franz didn't stand up to object. Soon the female attendants from each family were summoned together. When they heard that they were going to play a game, the female attendants all looked frightened. Only Jenny looked at Franz in confusion. First of all, Franz does not often hang out with these playmates. Secondly, Failure used to participate in such games. Thirdly, Failure is one of the few squires who enjoys playing with children. To be honest, this group of kids is pretty awesome. They quickly made a battle list and game rules. They even formulated a reward and punishment mechanism to prevent them from not working hard or having a fake match. Of course, in order to increase the fun, eggs and tomatoes will not be missing. The teenagers even opened a handicap. Gambling can make the game more exciting point. Since there were only 13 female attendants, 3 more good-looking maids were added. The rules are that the winner of the first round can get 10 gold coins, 50 florins, about half a year's salary of an ordinary soldier. The winner of the second round can get 20 gold coins, and the winner of the third round can get 10 gold coins. The winner can get 40 gold coins. In addition to getting 100 gold coins, the final winner will also receive special rewards. As for the losers, they will be thrown tomatoes and eggs, but that's not the end of it. The winner will cook those tomatoes and eggs and give them to the loser to eat. There will be subsequent punishments for not finishing the meal. Gianni quietly sat next to Franz and asked, "Do these children usually play like this?" Franz nodded. Gianni was a little surprised. She thought she had seen enough of the world, but she didn't expect that the children of big nobles were so good at playing. "Can I not participate?" Gianni asked. "Can I not come next time?" Franz asked. Gianni was speechless. For the first time, she felt that being the crown prince was quite hard. Soon the game started. Miss Mary and Mrs. Sabit came on the stage. Neither of them had ever fought before, and they were both wearing very crappy skirts, and their actions were very funny. However, these brats had little patience, and grabbed the tomatoes and eggs at hand, and threw them at the two of them. You ask, whether tomatoes or eggs hurt more when hit? Franz doesn't know, but he knows that the person being hit will definitely feel pain. At this time, a tomato hit Mrs. Sabit's face, and Miss Mary took the opportunity to knock it down. Mrs. Sabit wanted to get up, but was held down by Miss Mary. Richard Metternich picked up the whistle in his hand and started counting the seconds. 10, 9. Seeing that his maid was about to win, Akadov immediately picked up tomatoes and attacked Mrs. Sabit. But it was not accurate, and instead hit Miss Mary in the back of the head, causing her to feel dizzy. Mrs. Sabit seized the opportunity and in turn pushed Miss Mary to the ground. As the countdown ended, Akadov threw away the coins in his hand. After losing the game in the first round, he had to take out 40 gold coins as a bonus. Next came the punishment session. In order not to be squeezed to death, Miss Mary could only untie her waist and eat the food in the bucket in a very embarrassed manner. However, women during this period generally did not eat much due to the gurgle. After eating for a while, she started to vomit. Akadov picked up his cane and was about to teach her a lesson. The moment the cane fell, Franz caught it. "That's too much, Akadov." Akadov was originally very angry after losing money, but when he looked back and saw Franz, he was a little at a loss. "Franz, me, okay, let's change the punishment to carrying a bucket to the civilian area to distribute food," Franz said. Everyone looked at each other. Some people hated playing with Franz, because as long as he was around, they could only follow his rules. However, most of the children's family elders would remind them before they came to play according to Franz's rules. Chapter 207 The Other Side of the Ocean. United States, Washington. Martin Van Buren should be regarded as one of the worst American presidents in history. There was an economic crisis when he took office. After that, France and Mexico continued to increase their military strength, forcing the United States to join the regional military competition. Historically, the US military has maintained a very low number of troops and did not begin to expand until the outbreak of World War I. But now the United States has to support an army of 100,000 people while it is facing an economic crisis. Maybe God is really blessing this country. First, Friedrich List came to the United States to preside over economic reforms, the core of which was to use foreigners' money to save the lives of the United States. This trick really worked, and it immediately stopped the outflow of precious metals from the United States. Although his reputation suffered some losses, Americans in this era are known as barbarians. As long as he can save the American economy, he doesn't care if others call him heresy or Genghis Khan. Afterwards, serious natural disasters and food crises broke out in Europe, and the United States teamed up with Russia to successfully harvest European leeks. At this time, Friedrich List proposed the Moses Plan, whose main purpose was to extradite those wealthy Egyptians to the United States. At this time, Egypt's internal and external troubles coupled with Muhammad Ali's cruelty, made many Egyptian dignitaries eager to leave this ghost place. The United States can send a fleet to pick up those powerful people and their treasures. If this plan can take shape, it will add a valuable asset to the United States. In fact, when Friedrich List first proposed this plan, he did not expect to receive such a large deposit. Martin van Buren had ordered the fleet to set sail to save the piggy banks, but Friedrich List was actually opposed to it. He felt that it was enough to just pay a deposit, and the fleet could wait until the situation became clearer before dispatching. After all, it would be best to move those piggy banks onto the American ship, but if the fleet is lost as a result, it will be more than worth the gain. As a businessman, Friedrich List was unwilling to take risks, but as a president, Martin van Buren was even more unwilling to lose credibility. Due to the impact of the economic crisis, strikes and protests by American workers continued. At first, Martin van Buren took a tough stance and asked the army to suppress them with force. However, the American people were full of martial virtue, and the army at that time couldn't even pay their troops, so it naturally collapsed. So Martin van Buren announced without restraint that the US government would accept the people's opinions and adopt a 10-hour working day. Just after the workers' strike was quelled, the conflict between the North and the South in the United States has escalated again. Northern factory owners wanted higher tariffs, but Southern slaveholders were unwilling to accept it. Because they know very well that once the tariffs are raised, they will only be able to buy the garbage produced by the Yankees. The originally lucrative export trade will become useless due to countervailing tariff barriers. In the midst of this dilemma, his Secretary of State, Friedrich List, came up with an idea that would allow the South to switch to poppy cultivation, while banning poppy cultivation in the North. Such an increase in tariffs would not only protect the interests of Northern industrial owners, but also allow Southern slave owners to suffer less economic losses. Although people nowadays always like to start with slavery when studying the American Civil War, the fundamental reason is still the conflict between Northern factory owners and Southern farmers, and the struggle between an agricultural country and an industrial country. The climate in the United States is very suitable for the growth of opium, and the vast land and sparse population make it easy for farms to grow on a large scale. But precisely because the land is so vast and sparsely populated, it is almost impossible to give the South the privilege of growing certain crops. Although the opium business is profitable, not everyone needs it, and as the scale expands and production increases, prices are bound to fall. Those Southern guys must have thought of something that came to mind so easily. In fact, due to the tight price of opium in recent years and the deep economic crisis in the United States, many opium plantations have appeared in the southern United States under the advice of Friedrich List. The production of opium in the United States is enough to meet domestic demand, but due to the relationship with the United Kingdom, it has been unable to open foreign markets, so the opium planting area has not further expanded. Martin van Buren hoped that the North and the South would stop quarreling and deal with the outside world together, defeat France and Mexico first, and dominate North America before talking about other things. However, the North and the South had serious differences over the ownership of Texas and northern Mexico. The South hoped to establish slave states in these places, and the North was naturally opposed to it. At this time, Martin van Buren stood up and openly opposed Texas becoming a slave state. From Martin van Buren's perspective, he was maintaining the balance of power between the two sides and preventing civil strife. However, in the eyes of Southern slave owners, this was a blatant violation of the Constitution, because according to the Missouri Compromise passed by the United States in 1820, the new states located south of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude should be slave states for a time. The name of unconstitutional president spread throughout the United States, and Martin van Buren could only stand up and publicly apologize, saying that he would abide by the Constitution. But the northern factory owners were unhappy again. They refused to fight for the southern slave owners, and they did not want to waste their own money to increase the strength of their opponents. As a result, northern factory owners asked the federal government to cut military spending, limit the number of troops, stop hostilities with France and Mexico, and turn to Oregon. American immigrants have been entering Oregon since 1830. The local indigenous Indians were weak and unable to stop the powerful white colonists. However, the main problem facing Oregon at this time was the British colonial government of Canada. Although there are not many British colonists in Oregon as a whole, it is still nominally a two-state co-governance situation. The actions of the northern factory owners will most likely arouse the anger of the British, which will make the situation of the United States even worse. Naturally, Martin Van Buren would not agree with this reckless approach. He could only work hard to maintain the situation in the United States amidst the condemnation from both the North and the South. If there was any order he had that was popular with the American people, it was the Seminole War, which was aimed at driving out the Indians. In order to win the support of the people and Congress, Martin Van Buren fabricated a lot of Indian atrocities out of thin air. It is said that they burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of evil. They often attacked white villages, killing men, stealing property, abducting women, and letting children join shamanism. There are also Indians who like to eat human flesh, drink human blood, sacrifice to evil gods, and even curse and kill white colonists under the vilification of the US government. Indians are robbers, devils, and disrespectful people. Although this kind of propaganda was outrageous, it was highly accepted by all classes in the United States because they all needed a legal reason to continue killing and expelling Indians. With the conspiracy of the US government and the American people, the Indians in the United States began their most miserable century. Chapter 208 Scored twice. Alexander Port. The members of the Austrian Marine Corps never expected that the defense of Egypt's most important port city would be so lax. In just an hour, they took control of the port and surrounding forts. According to Neddy Eying, the newly appointed governor Alexander had expropriated money in the city. Except for a few powerful people and wealthy businessmen who had escaped, more than half of the wealth in the entire city was in the treasury. According to the new governor, the war on the front line was tight, and refusing to pay was tantamount to collaborating with the enemy, so no one dared not to pay. In fact, the money belonged to Alced, who was planning to make another fortune before running away, so that he could retire in the United States. In fact, most of the Egyptian dignitaries and wealthy businessmen who have negotiated extradition with the United States have chosen Matruh because it has been looted by the Austrian Navy before, and theoretically there will be no second robbery. And even the Austrian Navy will not attack American ships that also belong to the Western camp. The reason why Alexandria's guards were so lax was not the fault of the Karamanli family, but Alced's fault. Alced collected so much wealth that it was impossible to take it away without being discovered. So he decided to let the Americans come directly to Alexandria so that he could transport all the treasures away in the shortest time. What Alced has to do is to weaken Alexandria's defenses as much as possible. When the American warships enter the harbor, even if others discover that he is traitorous, there will be nothing they can do against him. Just when Alced was discussing life with the side room, one of his soldiers knocked on the door. "Your Majesty the Governor, Your Majesty the Governor, something bad has happened. You'd better be okay, otherwise I'll chop off your head." Al was very unhappy to be disturbed. Enemy ship. Enemy ship is attacking. The enemy has landed. None of the 8 Aga can be found now. What should we do? The soldiers did not know Alced's plan. Because Al knew that the less people knew about his call for the fleet, the safer he would be. He was not afraid that his soldiers would betray him, but he was afraid of causing trouble. After all, Muhammad Ali was suspicious now, and if he heard the news, he would be betrayed. If you kill him, won't all your efforts be wasted? As for the disappearance of all 8 Aga, it was a blessing from Alced. Aga is an official position in the Arab world, almost equivalent to the head of a regiment. In Alexandria, it was the head of 8 military camps. The disappearance of these people was naturally caused by a series of assassinations, kidnappings, ambushes and other means carried out by insiders, which resulted in the death or injury of these people. The Egyptian soldiers without a commander simply did not want to rush into the city to fight the enemy troops whose numbers and origins were unknown. Compared with the well-defended Shayansi Bay, where the Egyptian Navy hides warships, Alexandria's defense is simply like paper. Hurry up and go to the treasury. We are leaving here. You can come with me to enjoy the happiness in the future. Alced thought it was an American warship coming to pick him up, so he excitedly asked his men to go to the treasury. "Move things to the port, Mr. Governor." "Where are we going?" the soldier asked. "America." Alced replied proudly. "The size of the Austrian navy is now different from what it used to be, but it still dispatches small and medium-sized steam warships and troop carriers. There is no other reason, because steamships are fast. Although the large battleships captured from Egypt have strong firepower and strong defense, they lack sufficient maneuverability for sneak attacks in the Venice and Trieste shipyards. The modification work of those Egyptian warships is being carried out over time. They are Friedrich's treasures and important chess pieces of Franz in addition to the 3,000 marines. Friedrich also brought 2,000 army and 2,000 professional sailors this time. Stealing is addictive. Friedrich not only wanted the treasury and weapons depot in Alexandria, he also wanted to take away all the ships in the port. The Egyptian garrison responsible for guarding the weapons depot only made symbolic resistance before giving up, and the city's most important garrison force fell. The Egyptian soldiers who were still sleeping were even worse, as Congreve rockets flew in from the door. The choking smell of sulfur filled the entire room, and the flames from the explosion ignited the barracks, where they were located. The fire quickly engulfed the camp, and there was a panic in the military camp. Some people were woken up by the fire in their sleep, and some were burned to death. The few Egyptian soldiers who managed to escape were ambushed by marines hiding in the dark. Almost all those who ran in the fire were knocked to the ground. Soon the air was filled with the smell of burning corpses. The soldiers did not kill them all, but left a way for the Egyptians to survive. As long as they ran into the mountains or the desert, the soldiers stopped pursuing them. In the city, bloody and fierce street fighting did not occur. In addition to a large amount of property, Alexandria's treasury also contained copper, iron, and hundreds of thousands of tons of grain. At this time, the residents of the city had already rushed over. This was of course the work of Franz. He hoped that the Karamanli family could make the Egyptians think that the Austrians were here to save them and defeat the tyrant, so they would not set fire to the city, but would instead open fire, store grain in the warehouse. The reason why Franz did this was not only for the family's reputation, but also because he believed that Friedrich would not be able to move everything away. The fact is that those copper and iron ingots cannot be moved at all. In addition to gold and silver, Friedrich mainly targeted cotton, indigo, and ships as for the weapons in the Egyptian arsenal. Except for the cannons, they were all distributed to the Egyptian civilians on the spot. Friedrich felt that, even if civilians took weapons, they would not be able to fight against the Egyptian regular army. But what Franz wanted was not for civilians to defeat the regular army, but to strengthen the people. Whether this is to force Egypt to surrender, or to make the British shed more blood when they conquer Egypt, it is a very good choice. Since ancient times, the colonists have been most afraid of security wars. As long as the cost of maintaining an area is greater than the benefits, the colonists will lose interest in it. Alced had heard that the enemy troops were moving things from the treasury, which made him feel that the Americans were really considerate in their service. But when he saw countless Egyptian people robbing property in the treasury, he couldn't help but feel angry and evil in his heart. Why are the damn untouchables in my treasury? What are they doing? Call those Americans over here. Alced roared. Several soldiers picked up sticks and rushed into the crowd, suddenly like tigers rushing into a flock of sheep. When the Egyptian people saw that the governor was coming, they shrank their necks in fear. Soon the soldiers reported to Governor Al that all the gold, silver and jewelry in the treasury had been taken away by those Americans. When Governor Al saw that the American was actually abandoning him, he immediately ordered his soldiers to clear the way and take him to the dock. No matter what, he had to leave here today. However, gunshots suddenly rang out from the crowd, and then the Egyptian people realized that, now that they had weapons, they no longer had to be afraid of the Egyptian officials who had been bullying them. The Egyptian people picked up the weapons in their hands and opened fire on the usually domineering governor and his soldiers, and the battle was about to break out. The Austrian navy, at this time, had completed its second interception and was loading ships to prepare to flee the scene. Chapter 209 Bleeding the British. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz dragged a Jenny, who smelled of alcohol, toward the bathroom. Franz tested that the water temperature in the bathtub was just right, and then looked at the unconscious Jenny. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart, I have let a group of children be indoctrinated. Is this all you can do? Franz lifted Ajani up and was about to put her into the bathtub when he saw Ajani looking at him with a smile. You'll get wet if you don't take off your clothes. Ajani's smile was very clean, her eyes were very lively, and she didn't look drunk at all. Only then did Franz realize that he had been tricked. How could an old goblin who had been involved in dances and drinking parties for many years get drunk by a group of children? Then, you've been pretending for so long. There's nothing you can do. Your friends are too bad. If you don't let them have fun, maybe something else will happen. After that, along the way, I saw that you were quite involved, so I will accompany you just for a moment. Franz threw Ajani into the bathtub. Clean yourself up. You smell like alcohol. After Franz said that, he turned and left. Franz turned around and saw Ajani raising her eyebrows. Wash together. No. Franz went out directly and closed the door. Then, help me fold an aloe vera, please. There's it on the windowsill. Get it yourself. Franz sat at the table, opened the newspaper, and saw a piece of news. The Englishman Sir John Keane led his army to conquer Afghanistan, and Dost Muhammad fled Kabul for Bukhara. His son Akbar Muhammad led the troops to continue fighting against the British. The British supported Shu'al Shah, a loser who had been on the throne for 30 years, to return to the throne. They took it for granted that the Afghans would recognize Shu'al Shah's orthodox status. Little did he know that Dost had already eliminated all Shu'al Shah's supporters, and now he was just a lone man. Although the British supported him as the king of Afghanistan, they were unwilling to give him real rights. There are still a large number of tribes loyal to Dost Muhammad in Afghanistan, and Akbar Khan Muhammad is a famous war god and military commander in Afghan history. Historically, the British were defeated at the hands of Akbar Khan, but the hero who defeated the British did not live to inherit the throne of Afghanistan in the end, but was poisoned to death because of his father's suspicion. As for Dost Muhammad, who was highly praised by Western historical circles, Franz really didn't think there was anything outstanding about him. If cruelty could be considered an advantage, this would be one of them. Franz wondered if the situation in Central Asia would be more interesting if a heroic commander became the king of Afghanistan. The Russians, the British, the Khiva Khanate, the Bukhara Khanate, Afghanistan, and Persia. I believe that in this way, the Russians will not be one-sided. The British could not take advantage of the opportunity to make war profits, because they had to always be wary of the threat of Akbar Khan. You must know that the Hindu Kush mountains between Afghanistan and India are also known as the mountains that killed India. It is said that Genghis Khan's cavalry entered the country from here, and blood flowed all over India. Not only Genghis Khan, but also the rulers who conquered India in history, except the British, all entered India through the Hindu Kush mountains. Moreover, if Afghanistan, with its barren land, wants to become a powerful country, the fertile land of the South Asian subcontinent is indispensable. Franz wanted to know how much blood the British could shed in Afghanistan, and whether Akbar Khan could create a miracle to counterattack the Indian subcontinent. Franz wrote a letter and planned to have it delivered to the people around Akbar Khan at an appropriate time. That's right, it was not left to Akbar Khan himself, because this man seemed to be a filial son who had countless opportunities to become a king in his life, but still tried every means to rescue his cruel father. In the end, Akbar Khan was poisoned by Dost, largely due to his foolish loyalty. It's just that the people around Akbar Khan are not as meek as him. After all, those who encouraged and followed Akbar Khan throughout history thought that he would become king sooner or later. If these people knew that Akbar Khan would be murdered by Dost, the Afghan tribal leaders who knew Dost's cruelty would definitely try their best to kill the tyrant first. As for whether the letter is true or false, and who wrote it, it will not matter to the Afghans at this time. Ajani came out with her hair disheveled. She was wearing a loose bathrobe, and there was a gap on her chest that flickered in and out with her steps. Franz, is the newspaper so good? Ajani said and shook her undried hair. Franz didn't answer her, he just kept talking to himself. Ajani couldn't hear clearly, so she could only move closer and stroke her long limp hair beside her ear. When did you learn the naked choke? Although Franz was always sure that Ajani would win in the end, he didn't expect that she would use a lot of messy techniques. In fact, Ajani's physical fitness is very strong. She can do 50 push-ups and 50 squats in one breath. How could those helpless maids be her opponents? Some people think that strangling means naked choke, but this is not the case. Different positions are divided into blood choke and air choke. Moreover, the key point of naked choke is not only to strangle the opponent's neck, but also to press the opponent's head hard with the other hand, which is considered a real choke. Naked twist. Look at you beating those kids. Didn't you explain it to them while beating them? Ajani said. Did you just learn the piggyback throw and the archbridge throw? Franz asked. Ajani nodded. You are really humiliating yourself. Franz sighed. Recruit a group of geologists and an expedition team when you are free. Where is the destination? You know, the terrain of each continent is different, and the types of scholars and explorers are also different. If the compatibility does not match, it is easy to get half the result with twice the result. Ajani said. Franz knew what Ajani said was right, so he said, Africa, Namibia. You seem to be very interested in Africa, but as far as I know, the most profitable place in Africa is. Ajani hesitated to speak. It seemed that she was planning to let Franz speak for himself. Slave trade, right? Franz said. Ajani nodded. We're not in that kind of business, Franz said, but there is a problem. Developing a colony requires enough manpower. Currently there are only more than 600 Austrians in Namibia. It would be difficult to complete the construction of the colony just by relying on them alone. Ajani said. You are right. That's why I want to send an expedition team to investigate. As long as important resources can be found, someone will be willing to take the risk to go there. Franz said. Then, why can't we learn from the British? Ajani asked. You mean to capture some homeless people and orphans and send them there? Ajani nodded noncommittally. We are not pirates after all, but you reminded me that if there are desperate homeless people, we can hire a group to send them there so that the construction of the colony can indeed speed up. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210. Good news. Vienna. Schönbrunn Palace. News of the victories in Alexandria and Beirut reached Vienna, and Franz was curious why Muhammad Ali did not surrender. If the fighting continues, let alone the government of Muhammad Ali, even the entire Egypt may be annexed by the Ottoman Empire. This is of course not that Ali refused to surrender, but that the British did not want the Egyptians to surrender. They wanted to weaken Ali's power as much as possible, and it was best to support a puppet loyal to them. This would make France lose all its investment and exclude it from competing for hegemony in the Near East. In theory, this is no problem, but there is a minor trouble, that is, Egypt, which is too weak, may re-enter the Ottoman territory instead of being a vassal state. This naturally has no problem for the British. But for Austria and France, this is a big problem. France felt that the two lands of Tripoli and Tunisia were very suitable for Austria's colonies because of their close proximity and huge development potential. But once the Ottoman Empire regains Egypt, the two territories bordering it, Tripoli and Tunisia, will inevitably return to the Ottoman sphere of influence. If Austria forcibly colonizes these two areas or establishes some kind of relationship with these two lands through the upper levels, will Britain start another Turkish-Egyptian war under the banner of maintaining the integrity of Ottoman territory? The French's worries are similar to those of the Austrians. Algeria in their hands was also a territory of the Ottoman Empire in the past. Moreover, the French also have ambitions in Tunisia, and they have huge interests in Egypt. Once the Ottomans ban the government of Muhammad Ali, the French investment will be lost, which is unacceptable in any case. Syrian battlefield. Following the melodious Grenadier March, Sequoia Army advanced. General Gablen saw the British attacking, and he also ordered the Austrian army to start playing music and prepare to attack. How should I put it? Austria is worthy of being a country of art, and even has several kinds of military music. The soldiers began to advance to the beat of chaotic drums. The skirmishers of the coalition quickly eliminated the light infantry of the Egyptian army, and the main line infantry of both sides finally faced each other. However, in the face of the coalition forces with superior artillery fire and skirmishers, the Egyptian formation was incomplete from the beginning. After entering the gun platoon stage, this disadvantage becomes more obvious. The coalition soldiers have higher quality and better equipment. Looking at the Egyptian line, someone fired the first shot out of fear, and then the Egyptian line, which was still 200 meters away from the coalition line, started shooting. There is no doubt that this kind of shooting has extremely limited lethality. Only a crackling burst of white smoke rises. Only a few extremely unlucky soldiers in the coalition ranks are knocked down, but their positions will be immediately taken up by their comrades behind them. The commander of the Egyptian line had to order the soldiers to quickly reload bullets while continuing to shoot. Looking at the approaching coalition line, the Egyptian officer simply broke the can and ordered free fire. Colonel Carter saw the Egyptians' foolish fighting style and knew that the battle was won. So the soldiers were asked to bring tables and chairs and coffee. Dear General Gablenz, would you like a cup of coffee? Many of the officers at that time were aristocrats, and it was not uncommon for commanders to take their mistresses to lunch as they fought hard on the front line. Thank you. Please give me a drink, Colonel Carter asked after pouring a cup of coffee for Gablenz himself. Do you want any sugar? Then he realized that he had done something stupid. Gablenz was putting the candy directly into his mouth, and the two parties looked at each other awkwardly. Finally, the coalition soldiers braved a hail of bullets and reached a distance of 50 steps. The Austrian army stopped at 70 steps. At that time, the styles of various European countries were different, and the commanders' commands were also different. Preparation. The black muzzles of the coalition soldiers' guns were instantly pointed at the Egyptian soldiers who were desperately loading bullets. Aim. Shooting. The coalition's queue flashed with flames and continuous gunshots. After the smoke passed, a layer of Egyptian soldiers was cleared. The front lines of the Egyptian army collapsed directly because hundreds or even thousands of people were killed at the same time. The effect was too shocking. However, the coalition's shooting did not end. The first row immediately gave up its position after the salvo, and the second row continued to fire another round of volleys. This time, more Egyptians fell. The Egyptian army behind them had already been bombarded by artillery shells, and when they saw the teams in front being cleared out row by row, fear had enveloped them. If it weren't for the supervising team behind them who were killing people, these people would have been killed long ago. Escaped. After the second round of salvo ended, the coalition soldiers who had just fired collectively squatted down to reload, while the soldiers behind continued to shoot. After 3 rounds of volleys, there were not many people left in the Egyptian line that initially encountered the coalition forces. The Egyptian army behind them, which was still hundreds of meters away from the coalition forces, started shooting again. Given the accuracy of the muskets and the level of training of the Egyptians, the coalition soldiers could load the bullets at their leisure. Another cycle started again, and Ibrahim wiped the sweat from his forehead. His most elite troops were harvested by the opponent like immobile scarecrows. Although he was unwilling to accept this reality, he had to consider for himself that, if he continued to fight with the coalition forces, he himself might be captured. So Ibrahim took the lead in the reverse charge on his beloved camel, and at the same time he also gave the order to retreat. Although Ibrahim's order was to retreat, the retreat quickly turned into a rout. At this time, the 600 hussars brought by Gablenz finally came into play. The cavalry rushed out from the flanks and prepared to cut off the fleeing enemy troops. You must know that the formed infantry is the nemesis of the cavalry, but the threat of the fleeing infantry to the cavalry is almost zero. The hollow square formation can even be said to have ended the era of cavalry dominating the battlefield, but without formation, it is difficult for infantry holding rifles alone to hit high-speed moving cavalry. Not to mention, most of the bullets in the Egyptian infantry guns were empty, and they were overtaken by the hussars before they even had time to mount their bayonets. These hussars are natural butchers, especially when facing infantry who don't even have bayonets. The cavalry raised their sabers on their horses and harvested the poor Egyptian soldiers with inertia. However, most Egyptian soldiers chose not to resist, but to find ways to run past the people around them. They seemed to think that they would be safe in this waypoint, but one thing they seem to have forgotten is that horses have 4 legs and they only have 2. The cavalry repeatedly charged into the Egyptian army's camp, and the coalition infantry also fixed their bayonets and began to charge. Everyone must have heard of the famous saying of Suvorov, the famous Russian military commander: "The bullet is a fool, the bayonet is a hero." However, many people don't know that he once said, "If you fight with a bayonet, you must keep bullets. If you fight with a bayonet without bullets, you will be worse than a fool." The coalition soldiers carried bayonets and launched a mass charge. At this time, the Egyptian army was bombarded by artillery fire, called out by skirmishers, endured several rounds of volleys, and was attacked by cavalry. The Egyptian army had already lost morale. The coalition soldiers were not fussy about bayoneting. As long as they didn't kneel down and throw away their weapons, they would just stab them with 1 or 2 swords. Even those Egyptian soldiers who threw away their weapons and surrendered were inevitably hit by gunbutt. Street prisoners of war, well, non-existent. In this era, there is not even the Geneva Convention, and whether to hold back or not depends entirely on the soldier's self-consciousness. Chapter 211. Good news. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz was not happy at all about Berat's victory. Ibrahim's main force was annihilated, and the Ottoman Empire and the coalition launched a full-scale counterattack. The 130,000 Egyptian troops deployed in Syria are fleeing towards their homeland. However, the return journey is not smooth. The second expeditionary force sent by the British has landed in the said area and is trying to cut off the Egyptian army's return path. At the same time, the guerrillas the team also kept bleeding the Egyptians, and with the continuous victory of the war, Britain no longer needs Austria as an ally, and the relationship between the two countries is no longer so strong. Franz's suggestion was to negotiate with the French, who now desperately needed allies to preserve Egypt's position. Although France and Austria have been feuding for centuries on the Near East issue, France and Austria currently have less conflict of interest, and it is easier to reach a consensus. Friedrich attacked Alexandria and returned victorious, saving countless people and capturing countless warships. The editor-in-chief of the Vienna Daily News is really admirable for his spring and autumn writing skills, and he can describe the robbery in such a high-level way. Friedrich really looted Alexandria this time. Even the fishing boats were taken away. The various materials looted, including gold, silver, and copper, were worth about 3 to 5 million florins. The ship, more than half of the ship, was destroyed due to a storm at sea. The most important thing is to completely turn Egypt's rear into a rotten land. The citizens of Alexandria who have obtained weapons and food will become Egypt's nightmare. Egypt, Manio Palace. The continuous blows made Ali crazy. Quick, write another letter to urge France to send troops as soon as possible. Tell Ibrahim to hold Syria. French General Jean Lannes will soon lead 800,000 French troops to support him. Listen, don't be afraid. I have a golden mountain in Sudan. As long as I win this war, I will share it with you. God has promised me that soon he will bring judgment on those damn infidels, and the Mediterranean Sea will turn into a whirlpool, swallowing up any enemy who dares to oppose us. Ali's cruel character had already caused complaints among the powerful, and his current madness even made some nobles turn against him. But Ali was indeed a generational hero in Egypt. He had long expected this to happen, and suppressed the rebellion at an incredible speed. But what Ali didn't expect was that some of the opponents had already taken away a large amount of money and boarded warships bound for the United States from Matruh Alexander Port. After the Austrian Navy retreated, the US Navy warships were anchored in a messy harbor at this time. Al Said happened to escape to the port under the desperate protection of his own soldiers. The US military was escorting the wealthy Egyptian businessmen who had paid to board the ship, and saw Al Said rushing towards the port with a large number of armed men. The US captain decisively ordered the firing. Hundreds of naval guns opened fire at the same time. Solid bullets and great bullets rained down, setting off a bloody storm behind the crowd. Al Said thought that the US military had recognized him, so he shouted, "I want to board the ship, I'm Al Said," and rushed towards the US warship with his own soldiers. However, the American soldier raised the black muzzle of his gun and gave an order, shooting. Most of Al Said's soldiers fell down, and then he remembered to shout in English, "I have money. I want to get on the boat." An American officer stopped his men and stepped forward to ask, "Where's the money?" The money was taken away by these mobs. They are all bandits. The US military officer frowned. "So, do you have money to pay for the ship now?" My money was taken away by the mob. Let me ask you again. Do you have money to pay for the ship? Please take me away. I will definitely find a way, Al said while hugging the thigh of the US military officer and begged, "Release, please." The US military officer instantly took out his revolver, shot Al Said 6 times in the head, and then swung the gun back into its holster very skillfully. Al Said finally fell in front of the door to freedom. After picking up the wealthy businessmen and dignitaries, the US warship slowly left the port. The American troops on board enthusiastically helped to count their belongings, which moved the rescued Egyptians very much. What these Egyptians didn't know was that these properties had already been included in the US government's treasury. Although they could live on American soil, their status would be serfs. There is nothing we can do about this. After all, immigrants are often the source of unrest. At this time Friedrich List came up with a good idea to sell these Egyptians to plantations in the South. In this way, there is no need to worry about their jobs, let alone the social unrest they will cause. Since the slave market is now tight, they can even provide the Federation with a considerable income. In the slave market at this time, the price of black people was $600, the price of Indians was $50, and the price of white indentured slaves was $200. These Egyptians could be sold for $100. No matter what. This operation saved more than 3,000 Egyptians, which cost more than $300,000. What a cost-effective act of charity. Martin van Buren commented. Schönbrunn Palace, Franz's study. Your Excellency, I think it is time to carefully consider the alliance with the British. The war situation has turned. If we continue to weaken Egypt, then the British will no longer need our help. Franz said, "The Egyptians still have nearly 200,000 troops, and they will not be defeated so easily. Our attack on Egypt can continue to increase the influence of the Austrian Empire, to avoid the prying eyes of the young people. If we want this 5-nation meeting to be successful, we must show use enough power." Archduke Franz, you have reminded me. Metternich was now very optimistic about the situation. His confidence stemmed from Austria's successive victories on both land and sea battlefields, and also from the successful colonization of Western Bosnia. The population of Croatia in West Bosnia has more than doubled in a short period of time, and most Bosnians have chosen to convert. This is not difficult for them. After all, once they are born, they will become familiar again. The Austrianization of Western Bosnia was much faster than imagined. The transformation of Belgrade was also very successful. The Serbian government moved a large number of Serbs, leaving behind a large area of unowned land, which made Austria's immigration plan very smooth. The immigrants who moved in could obtain a large and fertile piece of land, which attracted a large number of young Austrians who could serve in the military, but had no land to cultivate. News of the relocation plan also spread to the German Confederation, and the generous conditions of military service and land made those who did not get along well in the German Confederation very excited, and they usually went to Austria with their families among them. The people of the 3 southern German countries close to Austria are naturally the biggest beneficiaries. After all, the 3 southern German countries are notoriously poor and have barren land. Austria's requirements are very simple. They can speak German, farm, and are willing to perform military service. For the poor people in South Germany at that time, this was like pie in the sky. Of course, in order for Belgrade to truly become Austrian land, the construction of infrastructure must keep up. A large number of public projects such as roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, and churches are being planned. Chapter 212 The idea of colonizing West Africa. Mr. Metternich, the Turkish-British commercial treaty was a devastating blow to Egypt's economy. It can even be said that, as long as this treaty comes into effect, Egypt will never be able to recover. If we continue to attack the Egyptian government, it is very likely to lead to uprising point. If someone replaces Ali, and this person turns to the British, then the British power in the Near East will become unprecedentedly powerful, and will pose a huge threat to the development of our country. They can expel the French under the pretext of helping the Ottomans, and they can also expel us. Metternich admired Franz's words very much. He felt that the Archduke would be his most outstanding student, but the Egyptians are allies of the French, and weakening them is equivalent to weakening France. Metternich said, this is only half correct. Egypt is indeed an ally of the French, but weakening it will only allow the French to stop their losses in time. Once France gives up Egypt, it can devote more energy and troops to Africa and America, and even going to Asia to fight for Vietnam. At this time, most of Western North Africa has fallen into French hands. Currently, only Togo, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Lion Rock, and Liberia have not fallen into French hands in West Africa. Point among them, Liberia is an American colony, Togo and Guinea were invaded by the Portuguese, Lion Rock and Ghana were backed by the British, and only the Ivory Coast is still a terra nullius. Even in the Ivory Coast, there were trade wars established by the 5 countries of France, Spain, Britain, Portugal, and the Netherlands. However, since the Ivory Coast abolished the slave trade in 1814, these trade wars were basically empty. You must know that in areas where the slave trade is prevalent, there must be very warlike ethnic groups there, such as the Kingdom of Dahomey in Benin. Although the historical Kingdom of Dahomey was not as powerful as in the movie, it was indeed a country where all people were martial. The same is true in the Ivory Coast region. There are 3 very powerful tribes who have been engaged in bloody and cruel battles for a long time. However, due to the decline of the slave trade, the strength of these originally strong tribes was declining rapidly. Ivory Coast is rich in agricultural and mineral resources. It later ranked first in cocoa production in the world. It is rich in gold, oil, iron, bauxite, nickel, manganese and other resources buried underground. However, it is still covered by grasslands and rainforests at this time. Development requires a lot of manpower and material resources, and the initial investment is a huge amount. France had sent several waves of people to negotiate with the local chiefs, but all failed. The reason was simple, because Austria did not have cannons and ships, and they were not afraid. Instead, several white adventurers were executed in front of Franz's envoy to demonstrate their strength. The people sent by Franz did not offend the chiefs. On the contrary, they brought rich gifts, as well as the muskets and bullets they needed most, as well as trade contracts. In fact, those chiefs also wanted to trade with Austria, no matter what, but because Austria did not have enough maritime strength, it was difficult to gain their trust. Most of the white adventurers executed by the chiefs were actually liars. Many white liars pretended to be European businessmen in an attempt to gain nothing, or exchange cheap Western industrial products for huge profits. As everyone knows, the slave trade has been carried out in this land for hundreds of years, and the chiefs have long been familiar with Westerners' routines. To put it bluntly, if you don't have the strength, Uncle Henry won't even play with you. I believe that soon after the first batch of warships of the Austrian Navy are refitted, the chiefs will be very happy to trade with Austria. As for the half-dead Western trading stations, Franz was prepared to spend money to eliminate the disaster. After all, the Austrian Navy at this time could only be regarded as a deterrent force, not the dominant force like the British Navy. In fact, in addition to acquiring this road, there is also the method of squeezing out the local indigenous people. On the one hand, this method is slow to achieve results, and on the other hand, it can easily arouse the anger of Western countries. Lion Rock and Ghana are in the hands of the British, and it is basically impossible for Austria to take them away. As for Liberia, although it has basically severed ties with the United States, the cost of conquering this land will be relatively high. You must know that Liberia is very brave, and even dared to seize British and French ships. Although they were beaten by British and French warships in the end, no major power dared to refuse to pay taxes in Liberia. There is still a lot of African land that can be colonized in this era. It is a good time for horse racing. France does not want to lose too much blood on a colony. Togo and Guinea in the hands of the Portuguese can be considered. Although they have the support of the British, these 2 colonies have always been in a semi-abandoned state. Historically, the Germans took them into their pockets at a very small cost point at this time. Portugal was still continuing the slave trade. As long as the slave trade in these two lands could be stopped, the Portuguese could easily sell these two colonies. Moreover, the Portuguese's willingness to defend their territory is not strong, and Austria can send people to infiltrate them unscrupulously. Point back to the story. Metternich did not take Franz's words seriously. He felt that, as long as the French did not keep an eye on Italy, everything would be fine. Isn't that better? While Britain and France are competing for colonies around the world, our Austrian Empire can better integrate the power of Italy. A complete Italy can definitely bring the Habsburg family back to its peak. Franz could only complain in his heart, by the time you finish integrating Italy, the world will be almost divided. Moreover, Italy's potential is not great. The north and central areas are just fine, but the south is a big piece of bad land. In addition, the northern and central parts were originally owned by the Habsburg family, but they were simply not defended historically. The family's current development in Italy has reached its limit. The Kingdom of Sardinia exists as a buffer state for Austria and France. This is what you set in the Vienna Agreement. Although the Papal States in the south rely on us, they want consolidating its land comes at a huge political cost. At this time, Austria's rapid development had covered up many contradictions, and Austria's rule in Italy was far from strong as imagined. Now is not a good time to continue to expand in Italy. Instead, we should first consolidate the original land. The Papal States, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies will sooner or later reveal their flaws, and that's when Austria's real opportunity will be. Austria's strength inadvertently fueled Metternich's ambitions. Especially after the establishment of the Apennine Customs Union, there was almost no response from Britain and France, which made him feel that the time had come to unify Italy. Metternich's diplomatic skills were indeed very clever, and he easily got Gregory XVI to sign a customs union agreement. Sardinia and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies were isolated. They either watched their economies shrink day by day, or they joined the Apennine Customs Union, and were cannibalized bit by bit by Austria. However, as the flow of people in Italy increased, and trade with Austria deepened, the national consciousness of Italian industrial and commercial owners was gradually awakening. Chapter 213. You are still young. Archduke Franz, you are worried too much. The current pope is a special case. After he ascends to heaven, the new pope will definitely be able to see the great potential of the Apennine Customs Union. As for the Kingdom of Sardinia and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, they will either accept their fate, or someone will take their place, and accept Italy's fate. Metternich believed that this plan was perfect. Of course, as long as no one interfered, and the Austrian Empire could remain strong, it would be feasible. It's just that the plan is good, but it cannot stand the test of reality. Britain and France will never sit idly by and allow one of the 5 major countries and potential competitors to grow in strength. In fact, with the current strength of Austria, it can indeed beat the Italian region. If the railway is added, it may really nip everything in the cradle. But the risk was too great, and France didn't want to try it. Because once the suppression fails and the railway is used by the rebels, it will be another story. And it's a horror story. Your Majesty Prime Minister, if the French and Luxembourg reach a tariff agreement, will you send troops to stop it? No, that would be too much of a loss. What? If the French want to annex Luxembourg, that's impossible. Not only us, but the Prussians will not let them go either. Metternich suddenly realized something. Yes, even if a place as small as Luxembourg is, we in Prussia will not let the French take it away, because they have touched our bottom line. Franz said, but if we do this, will the British feel that we have betrayed them? Metternich said, Your Excellency, I think the British will betray us first, especially when they learn that the Jewish state cannot be established. Franz replied. When he mentioned the Jewish state, Metternich laughed out loud. Jewish state? That is simply the funniest joke I have ever heard. Even the Jews don't believe it can succeed. The British must be crazy to do this. Actually, it's not all Jews. What you come into contact with are Jews with status, but the middle class is very yearning for such a country. Their desire for power is unimaginable. As for the bottom, unless they can't survive or get action will only be taken if there is sufficient assurance. Although Franz knew that the Jewish state would not be successfully established at this time. He felt that some Jews must be ecstatic about this event. Archduke Franz, do you know? The British moved this to solve the Ottoman economic crisis. They wanted to use Jewish money to maintain high profits from trade. Those Jews were not fools. How could they hand over their money so easily? There are many ways to get Jews to pay. I know what you mean, but that doesn't work. Jews usually keep their money in banks in another country. If the Ottomans really want to take away the wealth of those Jews, there is a high probability that it will be cheaper for a third country. Just like the Jews in our country, they usually deposit their money in Prussian or French banks. This will prevent you from being penniless when you break the law in our country or are deported. Metternich said, well, they are indeed cunning. But at least we don't have to worry about the unfavorable situation of the Jews and the Ottomans uniting. But the British are not ideal allies. They only pursue eternal interests now. Franz still wanted to persuade Metternich to give up his illusions about the British. Countries that tried to join forces with them in history all declined without exception. Archduke Franz, you are still young, and you don't understand. It is precisely because of our common interests that our country and the United Kingdom are together. As for the issue of negotiations with France, I will consider it carefully. Archduke Friedrich suggested to me then, let Tripoli become independent from the Ottoman Empire and transform it from a satrapy into a vassal state. Metternich said, it seems that Prince Metternich will not change his attitude. After all, the hatred between France and Austria is too deep. As the biggest victim of the entire Napoleonic War, Austria does have reason to hate France. France could only hope that Egypt would not be weakened too much and that France could still maintain its influence. But now we have no way of knowing whether Tripoli, a dependent country, will turn to us, Britain, or France. I don't think this is a condition worth exchanging. There were only a few thousand Ottoman troops in Tripoli, and coupled with the deep roots of the Karamanli family, Franz felt that, as long as he supported a batch of weapons, he could actually overthrow the rule of the governor of Tripoli. At this time, Tripoli had become a complete wasteland after the slave trade stopped. The agriculture was very backward and there was almost no arable land. Food was mainly imported. Nomads accounted for about 1/3 of the country's population. The tax revenue depends entirely on the fees incurred by foreign merchant ships berthing here. Almost half of the population is concentrated in the port of Tripoli. I think Archfriedrich will find a way. This talented naval admiral has directly saved the Austrian navy 10 years of development time. Metternich spoke highly of Friedrich's surprise attack on the Egyptian port, but what he didn't know was that the plan for this operation was drawn up by France. Yes, but the gap between our country and the British Navy is at least 50 years. Now our coastline is extremely short, and we are not afraid of threats from the sea. However, after integrating the Italian region, this situation will be reversed. After Austria integrates the Italian region, the length of the coastline will increase several times. When faced with threats from the sea, the Austrian army will have no choice but to run exhausted. As for attacking overseas colonies, it is a choice that outweighs the gains and losses, and division of troops is the most taboo in naval battles. Maritime communications at that time were extremely unfavorable. As long as you were unlucky, it was common to lose contact for several months at this time. Except for the British Navy, no country in the world dared to choose to divide its forces to fight at sea. Metternich obviously didn't know much about military affairs, and he was old after all. Although there is a gap of 50 years, I believe that when you come to the throne, you will lead our country to surpass the United Kingdom. Now Austria's economic growth rate has surpassed that of the United Kingdom. Don't worry, God has arranged everything. After that, he talked a lot with Metternich, but the conflict between the two concepts was relatively large. Metternich was not interested in overseas colonies, but Franz, who knew the history of later generations, certainly knew how important the colonies were. Metternich's reason was that there was still a large area of land in Europe that could be developed, and overseas colonization was completely unnecessary. Moreover, it can be seen from the collapse of the Spanish Empire that colonies will seriously hinder the development of the country. At the same time, he also expressed what he was most worried about, which was the hidden danger in the country. The theories of Mazzini and others were spreading wildly in Austria, and then evolved into a series of troublesome organizations. For example, Youth Vienna, which was suppressed not long ago, was originally a fraternity of a group of artists and college students, but it was soon invaded by some extremists, and an idea that Viennese people were superior to others evolved. Under the guidance of this idea, they even planned to expel the 3 regions of Dalmatia, Tyrol, and Galicia on the grounds that they were too poor. As the Austrian Empire joined the German customs union and later formed the Apennine customs union, domestic nationalist ideas were violently colliding with each other, and the number of people affected by it was far greater than at the same time in history. Chapter 214 Worry. Schönbrunn Palace. Franz's study. After Metternich left, Franz began to think seriously about how nationalism spread in the Austrian Empire. If Metternich hadn't mentioned it himself, Franz would have never known that the nationalist trend in Austria had developed to such an extent. Although historians at the time and later generations like to claim that Metternich was a dictator with absolute power, as long as you analyze it a little, you will know that this is simply nonsense. Metternich was well aware of what these nationalist trends meant, but he was unable to effectively gather manpower and material resources to effectively deal with this challenge. The foreign ideas that Metternich had been banning actually originated in Austria during the time of Joseph II. With Franz's intervention, the German customs union and the Apennine customs union continued to bring some messy ideas into Austria. Although Metternich's secret police carried out more and more transnational law enforcement, they still could not stop the spread of these ideas. The current trend of nationalism in Austria is much more turbulent than in history. The reason why Franz doesn't feel it at all is because the country's stability and rapid development have temporarily covered it up. At the same time, Franz also focused his energy too much on the people at the bottom, especially the recent Danube floods, which took a lot of his time, so he ignored this increasingly serious problem. What's even more frightening is that Franz inadvertently sheltered a large number of radicals because he had very low requirements for scientists except for professional standards. During this period, the relationship between the Austrian government and universities was actually antagonistic. Metternich believed that universities were breeding grounds for opposition, so almost all presidents of public universities were members of the secret police. One of their responsibilities was to reduce the number of students and scholars at the university as much as possible. That's why Franz saw the scene where the security guards of the University of Vienna would openly bully a scholar in the face of the surging nationalist thoughts. Metternich's idea was to build a high wall, using a high wall composed of censorship, spies and comprehensive repression, to stop the progress of the times, as well as other measures such as slowing down the flow of social classes attempts and policies to reduce college enrollment. All of this became the monstrous flood of 1848, and Metternich himself had to step down, sadly, even causing the entire Austria to fall into desperate turmoil. Franz felt that it was not difficult to deal with the national elite, nor was it difficult to deal with the local nobility, nor was it difficult to deal with the revolting workers and peasants. National elite refers to businessmen, factory owners, scholars, and some bureaucrats. But what is terrible is that the national elite and local nobles have joined forces to enslave the upper class and the poor. At the same time, natural and man-made disasters will occur. The combination of the above factors will make it even more difficult. Compared to Prince Metternich's checking and filling in the gaps, Franz preferred to make the best of the situation. The spread of various ideas is not all bad, such as the Greater German thought. Due to the strength of the Austrian Empire, more people are willing to accept this viewpoint, especially after the natural disaster of 1838. Many civilians who fled the disaster and participated in disaster relief came into contact with the Greater German thought. The effect of the song adapted by Franz was much better than the speeches delivered by professors. It's just that the countries in North Germany have a headache with the spread of the idea of Greater Germany. In the Kingdom of Hanover, everything went wrong for Ernst August Eyskens. First, his eldest son lost his eyesight due to an accident. In the second year, after he took over the kingdom, one terrible natural disaster after another almost emptied Hanover's treasury. At the same time, as the theoretical second heir to the British throne, he encountered strong resistance from Parliament. Due to the continuous expansion of the German Zollverein, Hanover's market is shrinking, and the deterioration of the financial situation is a hotbed of opposition. Ernst August I was a representative of the reactionaries. Faced with a precarious situation, he chose to abolish the liberal constitution, sent troops to comprehensively suppress the opposition, and cause the Göttingen massacre. Dozens of professors and hundreds of college students were arrested, a considerable number of whom died in prison, and the rest were brutally tortured. The situation in Prussia was similar. The situation faced by Frederick William IV was much worse than in history. Not only was the sudden death of William III causing him to ascend the throne early, but also a series of impacts brought about by Austria's entry into the German customs union. It made him miserable. The army asked for money to update its equipment, and the Prussian generals assured him that, as long as they were equipped with breech-loading guns, his army would be invincible. Frederick William IV did not know whether his army could be invincible, but he knew that his treasury was empty, and he could only survive by issuing national debt. The Minister of Agriculture demanded the construction of water conservancy projects, the development of new fertilizers, and the use of new agricultural tools. The Minister of Industry demanded increased investment in mines and new equipment. The most outrageous thing was that the Minister of Transport demanded the construction of tens of thousands of kilometers of railways and the dredging of all rivers in Prussia. At this time, Prussia's finances were far inferior to those of the Austrian Empire. If it wanted to increase investment, it would have to increase taxes. However, the number of domestic opposition was growing day by day. The previous food crisis further aggravated land annexation. Farmers who lost their land had no choice but to enter factories or flee to the Austrian Empire. Historically, this food crisis created a large number of landless peasants, provided a large number of cheap labor for Prussian factories, and promoted the development of industry. However, because Franz had been thinking of ways to attract immigrants, the Prussian farmers who had lost their land had another option. Although the number of landless farmers entering cities has decreased, factory owners' exploitation of cheap labor has not weakened. At the same time, due to the fierce collision of various ideas within the German Confederation, the call for a constitution was getting louder and louder. The Hohenzollern family could not accept this request to limit the king's rights. As a result, the relationship between Prussia and Austria changed from hostility to joint law enforcement. Unlike the fierce opposition and strong suppression by Austria, Prussia, and Hanover, the King of Bavaria chose to lie down. Ludwig I himself was a conservative, but he was more addicted to enjoyment than cruel politics. Ludwig I was very romantic, and the portraits of 36 beauties in Nymphenburg Palace bear witness to this history. The scandal with his mistress Laura Munster even made the whole of Europe aware of it. He spent all his money on pleasure and naturally did not have enough money to suppress heretics, so he told the German Confederation that any country could suppress reformers. Other German states are also facing more or less the same problems, and the whole situation is becoming more and more difficult to figure out. Although the Austrian Empire is much stronger than in history, the potential energy of this storm also seems to be much stronger than in history. Faced with such a powerful wave, Franz did not dare to direct all flows towards Greater Germany, because a super empire that appeared out of thin air would inevitably be besieged by all of Europe. Moreover, the position and situation of this empire are worse than those faced by France back then, and it is even more difficult to break through. Ask for votes. Chapter 215 Nonsense. Schönbrunn Palace. Franz's study. Franz always believed that there was no need for him to choose sides when watching gangsters fight. As long as Austria does not act like a bitch to the British, Franz can accept other behaviors. Of course, Franz would not do nothing. At least he would not let the British completely take the initiative in negotiations. There are no places to plunder in the coastal areas of Egypt, and the hot and scorching weather is not conducive to the march of our own army officers and soldiers, so it is appropriate to take this opportunity to rest and recuperate in the desert to escape the heat. As a result, the Austrian troops in the coalition were fully deployed. In fact, no one in the world likes to fight. Unless they can't help themselves, or the temptation is too great. No one wants to put their head in their belt. Friedrich was very dissatisfied with the performance of the Austrian Navy surprise attack on Alexandria. One operation encountered 2 storms, which greatly reduced the fleet's profits. Nearly half of the small boat stolen from Egypt, its supplies, and the Egyptians responsible for driving the boat were lost. Of course, the surviving Egyptians did not resent Friedrich, but instead prayed for him with great gratitude. But it was a shame for this high-spirited naval star. Friedrich dismissed the navigator and ordered him to erect a monument for each victim to atone for his sins. In fact, the pilot was very wronged. After all, sea navigation is full of unknown risks, and he only made judgments based on experience. Weather prediction in this era was still in the metaphysical stage, and sailors could only make guesses based on their own experience, combined with the prevailing weather. But Friedrich didn't think so. He decided to go to France to see if this cunning kid could do anything. Royal Garden. Franz looked helplessly at this slightly short uncle. The current technological conditions are not enough to solve this problem. I do have some equipment here that you may be able to use. To be honest, Friedrich's question is too advanced. Not to mention that Austria does not have the ability to establish weather stations all over the Mediterranean. Even if it has weather station information, it cannot transmit it in a timely manner. The massive calculations that can be transmitted in a timely manner cannot be completed by humans. Of point in history, someone tried to get 64,000 mathematicians to calculate the information on weather changes at the same time, but the result was of course a failure. Even at the end of World War II, humans were still unable to accurately predict the weather. Ajani brought a box and placed it in front of Friedrich. What is this? Friedrich immediately looked excitedly for his dream weather forecaster, thermometer, hygrometer, rain gauge, wind speed detector, wind direction meter, barometer. Ajani helped introduce. So troublesome? Are all these useful? Friedrich asked. Yes. Franz nodded. With these, can I predict the weather? Cannot. Friedrich immediately frowned. Then, what do I need these for? They can play some auxiliary role and provide you with some data to make your guesses more based. Franz replied. Friedrich was speechless for a while. Is there really nothing you can do? There is no way. Even if it takes another 100 years, this problem may not be solved. It turns out that there are times when you are powerless. Miss Ajani, it's really funny to see how helpless and natural Franz is. Friedrich smiled awkwardly, because Ajani just made a half smile responded to him with an expression. The provoking method is useless to me. This is indeed beyond the scope of my ability. Franz was not very happy either. Friedrich obviously regarded himself as a robot cat, and this feeling of powerlessness was very unpleasant. Okay. Friedrich didn't hesitate. Can you modify your rockets? They are always flying around in the sky. Although it is now possible to ensure that they fly forward, there is still no way to control where they will explode. It happened that the design of the rodless spin rocket had recently been completed, so Franz took out the drawings. What is this? It looks like an old-fashioned long-barreled artillery piece. The one in front of the launcher is the main body of the rocket, without the wooden pole. Wouldn't the shaking be even worse? No, because the tail fin is added, this wooden pole becomes redundant. After removing the wooden pole, it will be more stable. And look at the tail of the rocket. Friedrich took a second look and found nothing different. Isn't it just that the direction of the tail has changed? No, this is called a spiral tail. It can use the flames ejected from the rocket to rotate itself to achieve stability. Its accuracy is far better than the previous long rod rocket. Franz answered very proudly. In fact, adding a tail fin to a long rocket is completely superfluous. It not only wastes money, but also creates something that is not very practical. The design of the spiral tail is not complicated, and it is very easy to modify. It just needs to increase the amount of gunpowder, so the help of a hydraulic press is needed. How much do you like the spiral design? The same goes for the previous propeller. What a strange guy. Roll. How much can the accuracy be improved? 10 times. That's not much. At least we won't hit the soldiers in the front row anymore. That's really good. You should take this opportunity To learn more about the British fleet and tactics, Franz suggested, the British tactics? Friedrich's tone was quite disdainful. Yes, the British Royal Navy's tactics. You must know that they have just wiped out the main fleets of the Egyptian and Ottoman navies. Franz knew that no country on the sea could compete with Britain at this time, so he felt that there was nothing wrong with letting the commander of his country's navy learn the British tactics. It has no reference value. The workmanship of the Egyptian warships is extremely poor. The materials used are cheap oak imported from France. Most of them are randomly pieced together. This kind of ship will be blasted by the ship killer twice. It will fall apart, and even larger storms can tear small ships apart. There are problems in the design of the hull and the sails. The craftsmen are also extremely careless and often use a fewer nails or less paint in key places. These seemingly small problems are indeed extremely fatal to the warship. Their ships can penetrate the hull with their 8-pounder guns and cause large-scale damage with their 12-pounder guns. Even if my ship fires a direct shot from a 16-pounder, it may not be able to break through the defense. Friedrich was very proud when he said this. After all, he had a modified steam ironclad. Of course, this ironclad cannot be called an ironclad in the strict sense, but a wooden sailing ship with iron plates hanging on both sides of the ship. Don't be too proud. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win every battle. Franz said. Friedrich slapped the table. Franz, I tell you, I know their ships better than those British guys. I have models of every ship in the Royal Navy, and I know how to destroy them. Franz was a little at a loss and had to spread his hands to show that he meant no harm. In fact, in this era, not only all naval admirals regard the sun never sets navy as their idol, but they also regard it as their imaginary enemy. From the day Friedrich chose the navy, he always wanted to defeat the Royal Navy. But when he discovered that with the strength of the Austrian Empire, the best result of fighting the British was the annihilation of the entire army, and the most rational choice was not to become an enemy of the British. Chapter 216 Five-Nation Meeting. Before the third Five-Nation Meeting, a ridiculous phenomenon occurred on the Syrian battlefield. On one side, more than 100,000 Egyptian troops were rushing for the road, and on the other side, 4,000 Sequoia troops were chasing after them. The Austrian and Ottoman troops following behind were stopping and walking, as if they were just watching a horse. At this time, Ibrahim was no longer as confident as before. He felt that the situation was over, and what he had to do now was to bring as many people back to Egypt as possible to preserve the fire for the future. The experience of several battles with the armies of foreign powers made him completely lose confidence in his own army. As for the low-level Egyptian soldiers, they did not want to fight at all. They were soldiers purely to avoid the oppression of exorbitant taxes and miscellaneous taxes, so they went to work in the army. At this time, the 130,000 strong army at the time of the expedition had grown to 60,000, of which 9,000 were killed, more than 20,000 were captured, and the rest were missing. Since the coastal areas of Egypt had been plowed by the Austrian navy, it was difficult for the British navy to do more at this time, and could only vent its anger by bombarding Alexander. The British navy's actions planted a bomb for them, which will leave them with a painful memory in the future, which I will not list here. Under the influence of Franz, the Austrian army began to cherish their feathers, and paid no attention to chasing the Egyptian army. The Ottoman army also had little interest in pursuing the Egyptians. Their large number also meant that more supplies were needed, and the recaptured lands also needed to be garrisoned, so that the forces were even more dispersed. Regarding the Syrian guerrillas, the Ottoman attitude was to try their best to destroy them. Yes, the Ottomans' response to the Syrian rebels who were armed and had been fighting the Egyptians was to suppress them with all their strength. In fact, this is not difficult to understand, because these Syrian guerrillas are also a destabilizing factor for the Ottoman Empire. Vienna, Caesar Hotel. This place was chosen as the venue for the Five Nations Conference because it is large and grand, and at the same time it is convenient and complete. It can be used to hold large-scale dances, and can also be used as a banquet venue for entertaining guests. Naturally, the owner here, Solomon Rothschild, could only temporarily leave his territory and find another place. In fact, although it was said to be a five-nation meeting, 7 countries came. The 5 countries naturally refer to the United Kingdom, France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. The other 2 are the Ottoman Empire, and the other one may be a little surprising, and that is Serbia. The British representative is the new Foreign Secretary Stratford Canning. The French representative is Guizot, the current actual helmsman of the French government. The Austrian representative is naturally the Prime Minister Metternich, who once dominated the European Prime Minister. The Russian representative is Diplomacy. Minister Nisolov has 2 labels on him, a pro-British man and a reckless man. The Prussian Baron Sewell. A brief introduction. The Ottoman Empire sent the former Grand Vizier, the scapegoat in the history of Fairchak, the most unlucky Grand Vizier, a traitor, the biggest cancer of the Ottoman Empire, an executioner who suppressed the people, and a blasphemer. This man had signed countless treaties that were humiliating and humiliating his country, so much so that he himself was numb to them. The entire Ottoman court would always think of him whenever they encountered a thankless task. Filchuk had suppressed uprisings in various places many times, signed death sentences against the remnants of the guards, and even had conflicts with religious groups, arresting and executing religious leaders who opposed the New Deal. But in a sense, he was only carrying out the Sultan's orders, not his own cruelty. The representative of Serbia is neither the powerful 17-member parliament nor Vucic, who is supported by Russia, but Milos, who has bewitched the Serbs in East Bosnia. Milos's appearance here is naturally the work of the French. They do not want the Austrians to safely take over Belgrade and Western Bosnia. Although Guizot claimed to be a pacifist, he also provoked many disputes and never stopped guarding Austria. He instigated the 3 southern German countries and Sardinia to have conflicts with Austria, and instigated Piasec's point. As soon as the meeting began, Metternich felt that the direction of the meeting was wrong. Because the British took the initiative as soon as they came up and talked about sanctions against Egypt, but Guizot, who should have jumped out to oppose it, nodded frequently. Instead of showing any intention of defending, he clapped his hands and applauded. The draft charter is: first, the Ottoman Empire's laws apply to Egypt and Sudan. Here refers to the Sultanate, a backward slave country to the south of Egypt. Second, Egyptian taxes need to be collected in the name of the Sultan, and 1/3 of the total revenue is turned over to the Ottoman Sultanate. At the same time, Egypt was required to pay an additional annual tribute of £100,000 to the Sudan, previously £10,000. Third, Egypt must disarm. The number of standing troops must not exceed 20,000. At the same time, no warships can be built without the order of the Sultan. The uniforms and flags of the army must be the same as those of the Ottoman army. Fourth, Egypt must return Syria and Crete. The Ottoman Sultan appointed Muhammad Ali as the governor of Egypt and Sudan. From now on, Egypt and Sudan will exist as Ottoman provinces, rather than kingdoms. Fifth, Muhammad Ali could designate an heir, but he had to go to Istanbul to accept the Sultan's appointment. Sixth, both sides should return prisoners of war. The French representative Guizot, who was expected to oppose fiercely, actually remained silent, which surprised the other powers. You must know that the French government and the public at that time were very dissatisfied with the Anglo-Austrian joint attack on Egypt, and they all demanded a declaration of war to protect France's rights in the Near East. Thiers had previously added 5 battleships to France's Eastern Fleet and recruited 10,000 new sailors. King Louis Philippe of France even expressed his intention to go to war with the great powers in public. Even more fiercely than the words of the Bonapartists, the French military even formulated a special attack plan for this purpose, cutting off the Strait of Gibraltar at sea to prevent the British Navy from entering, and then using the powerful force of the Eastern Fleet to destroy the British and Austrian navies in the Mediterranean, forcing the Ottoman Empire to surrender, attacking the Rhineland and northern Italy simultaneously on land, declaring war on Prussia and Austria, especially after the British advance fleet was severely damaged by the Egyptian navy. The French became extremely fanatical, and the recruiting stations were even more crowded. In response, Prussia and Austria sent more troops to the French border, and war seemed imminent. But in fact, Louis Philippe did not want war, so Thiers, who advocated war, stepped down and was replaced by the aging Marshal Soult. The person in charge of the negotiations was the pro-British Guizot. Guizot always believed that, if France wanted to be strong, it must maintain friendly and peaceful relations with Britain. For this reason, he even betrayed the Egyptian Navy's intelligence in exchange for Britain's trust. The French government's actual inaction attitude also made the French gradually calm down. Many people began to realize that launching a battlefield had no chance of winning, and it was not the only option. At the same time, Canning was different from Palmerston. He hated Austria, but not France. After leaving Austria, he went to France without stopping, and promised Louis Philippe that he would take care of France's face. The seemingly simple sanctions agreement actually contains evil intentions. The UK has already set a gallows for the participating countries if the content is not fully expressed in plain English. If it is not fully explained, some people will criticize it for being literate. If it is fully explained, some people will criticize it as copying it into plain language. Please understand that fighting is difficult for me too. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217, The Second Day. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz looked at the terms of sanctions against Egypt, and there seemed to be nothing wrong. The British goal had been achieved, and the British-Turkish commercial treaty would officially take effect in Egypt. At the same time, France's privileges in Egypt were also taken back by the Ottomans. As for the British's spring and autumn brushwork, they played tricks. Franz felt that Metternich could handle it. If not, then he could consider replacing him. Egypt returned Crete and Syria, but at least retained the mainland and Sudan. A weak Egypt could not stop Austria's expansion of Tripoli. Franz felt that the first day's meeting was quite successful. As long as the Ottomans were not allowed to regain Egypt, it was a victory. Although the treaty severely limited Egypt's power, the British and the original World Line tried to enter Egypt several times without success. In the end, they had to bribe Ali to get their wish. Historically, in 1843, the British government gave Muhammad Ali a steam battleship. The displacement is about 800 tons, so it is not considered a battleship. The Queen of England also gave him personal gifts, and the first British multinational corporations such as the East India Company also gave gifts to Ali in order to seek the right to establish a foothold in Egypt. Later, he was awarded the Peace Medal and even invited his eldest son to visit the UK. The topic on the second day was the Strait issue. The British proposed the condominium proposal as in history. The difference was that the person who proposed it was changed from Palmerston to Canning. Britain and France have the same attitude on this issue. They feel that for the sake of peace, it is necessary for the great powers to reach a consensus in the form of a joint declaration or treaty. Historically, it was due to the insistence of Britain and Austria, the change of France's attitude, and Nasserlov's suicidal operation, that the Straits Convention was reached. However, Austria had an ambiguous attitude at this time. Nasserlov was somewhat confused, and he had to write a letter to the Tsar. The price we pay for the channel is too high. In fact, it ties our hands. Telegraph was not yet popular in this era, and the most effective way to transmit information over long distances was pigeon mail. In fact, due to Franz's influence, Tsar Nicholas I at this time was not prepared to give up his privileges in the Strait. In his reply he wrote, "We have to protect Russia's security, the Ottoman Empire's security, so the Black Sea Straits should not be open to any country." Of course, the participating countries did not wait for the Tsar's reply, so they moved directly to the next topic. Canning proposed the idea of a Jewish state. His idea was that, although Jews were not welcome in Europe, they should have the right to establish their own state. It just so happened that Muhammad Ali gave up Syria, and perhaps it could be established here. A Jewish state. Hearing this, Filchuk, who was very happy just now, immediately turned ugly. He thought he could take back the land taken away by Ali, but he didn't expect that the British would actually give the sacred territory of the Ottoman Empire to those filthy Jews. Jews were also not well received in the Ottoman Empire. As for the reason, everyone knows it. Nasserlov couldn't sit still when he heard that the Holy Land was allocated to the Jews. He immediately stood up and glared at Canning. "I will fight you, sir." In fact, Guizot had reservations about the British proposal because the Catholic power in France was strong. If the Holy Land was given to the Jews, it would undoubtedly arouse strong dissatisfaction among the people, and then he, the foreign minister, had done his best. Sewell, who couldn't help but yawn, obviously didn't take the negotiations to heart, and he had no interest in topics related to religion. The situation in Austria is similar to that in France, except that the church will at most express some dissatisfaction, and will not do anything to Metternich, the prime minister. If Nasrallah had not come forward, Metternich might have expressed his dissatisfaction, but it seemed that there was no need now. Soon this turned into an all-out conflict between Britain and Russia. Cunning naturally would not accept Nasrallah's proposal for a duel. After all, he did not want to fight a veteran. If he lost, he would definitely become a laughingstock in the diplomatic community. But even if Cunning wins the duel, with the Russian thinking, he will probably send a duel master to regain the situation next time, which will not be beneficial to the progress of the negotiations. I reject you, coward. You insulted my beliefs, and I demand an apology from you. We are negotiating to solve the problem, not create it. The two sides argued for a long time with no result, and Cunning finally had to ask for a show of hands. However, he soon discovered that no one among the great powers at the meeting agreed with his proposal, and Russia fiercely expressed its opposition. Cunning had no choice but to give up the proposal. He took it for granted that Austria, France, and the Ottomans were all traitors, and had betrayed his plans at the dance after the negotiations on the second day. Nasrallah took a wine glass and showed off how he faithfully performed his duties, protected Jerusalem, and thwarted the conspiracy of the heretics. Metternich was an expert at holding balls, and the Viennese aristocrats also had rich experience in this. The atmosphere was very warm, and of course the Vienna atmosphere team was responsible for this. In order to entertain distinguished guests from all over the world, Metternich hired all the popular girls from the top brothels in Vienna, as well as some actresses and ballet dancers. Of course, in addition to the atmosphere group, there are also many well-known artists and leaders in various industries at that time. If you wanted to meet big people, this kind of dance was the best place. At the same time, Metternich was also showing Austria's soft power to other countries compared with the worried missions from various countries. Sevier was having a great time, but he also sincerely lamented that Austria's entertainment service industry is so powerful that Berlin is like a slum in comparison. Of course, the other members of the Prussian mission were busy. Some of them were here to discuss business, and some were here to spy out more useful intelligence. Although some people in Prussia have begun to propose colonizing Africa, they have not attracted the government's attention. There was a special young man among the mission. He was a farmer from Pomerania. When he joined the mission, he used the identity of a private in the Potsdam infantry regiment. A private soldier did not attract the special attention of Austrian officials, but the inconspicuous young man in front of him would become the famous iron-blooded Prime Minister Bismarck in the future. At this time, he should have been at home helping his father take care of the farm. However, due to the change in the timeline, the influence of the Austrian Empire was unprecedentedly powerful, which made this young man who had won 25 duels feel a little itchy. Historically, Bismarck has participated 25 times in college and only injured his arm once. Bismarck wanted to meet his biggest enemy in the future and the prime minister who had been the leader of Europe for more than 30 years. Metternich, who returned to his home court at this time, was naturally at ease. Ambassadors from surrounding countries all toasted to him. The Austrian Empire can be said to be the country that benefited the most from this Near East crisis. At the same time, Austria's influence was also growing. The failure of the London Conference was in sharp contrast to the successful convening of the two Vienna conferences. People even called Vienna the conference capital and the center of European politics. During the ball, transactions between Austria and other countries were still going on, and countless dignitaries, wealthy businessmen, and fair ladies were surrounding Metternich like stars holding the moon. At this time, a young man said something that made everyone laugh. He can take his place. The Prussian officials who were traveling with him regarded this as a joke. Chapter 218. The third day. British cunning. Our invincible navy and powerful industry mean that we are number one in the world. French Gazette. Because we are Anglophiles. Nasser love Russia. Say, I will protect everything in the Black Sea. Metternich, Austria. It is a duty to restore the glory of Vienna. Prussia. Sewell. I'm successful if someone listens to me. The third day was different from the calmness of the previous 2 days. Millis dropped a bombshell right at the beginning. In order to thank you for your kindness and generosity, please allow me to care about the reputation of each country. At a time when all countries are working hard for peace in the Near East and the world, this honor has been tarnished in the most shameful way. There is a country that is intoxicated in the joy of victory at this time, and all of this is a false illusion based on conspiracy. While the soldiers of the 5 countries were bleeding and sweating for peace, he forced a free country to give up its sacred capital, a solid fortress that had long resisted foreign invasion. I, Millis, hereby accuse the Austrian Empire of using the most despicable and filthy means to force Serbia to sign a treaty with them that is humiliating and has plunged my people into an endless civil war. And Prince Metternich, the initiator of all this, has not been tried, which is the greatest blasphemy against justice and justice. All this was of course Gizet's handiwork. Metternich did not expect the appearance of Millis. He was hidden in the French delegation, and what he kept silent was to mix the waters again. France certainly does not want Austria's influence to grow, and at this time there is no longer any bargaining chip that can threaten France on the negotiating table. Britain's plans for a Jewish state failed. Russia refused to surrender control of the Channel, and Austria was the only country to make territorial gains at this time. Britain already has the support of France, so it no longer needs Austria as an ally because France is now much stronger than Austria. The Austrian Empire did not improve economically until it joined the German Zollverein in 1834. It had always been called a shame to the great powers. Prince Metternich was a good player politically, but he was obviously a little incompetent in economics. Even he was deceived by the Jewish financial group. Count Korolev is a good man in making money for himself. Corruption, but he has done little in the national economy and can only do some small tinkering. Baron Brooke was the greatest contributor to the financial survival of the Austrian Empire, but all he could do was maintain the status quo and was unable to open up new situations at the same time. Nasrallah was a short-sighted diplomat. Cunning described to him a beautiful picture of Britain and Russia joining forces to rule the world, which made him a little excited, and even planned to sign the Strait Condominium Agreement. The situation at the 5-nation meeting seemed to suddenly become unfavorable to Austria, but Metternich, who had experienced countless storms and waves, did not panic. You seem to have been deposed by the Parliament of 17. Let me find out your current identity. Metternich calmly put on his single-lens reading glasses. Leader of the East Serbian rebels, brutally murdered executioners of Serbian residents. What right do you have, a slave with 3 surnames, who betrayed your motherland, your master, and your allies to accuse you? Since the Catholics in Bosnia have been persecuted, our country negotiated with the Ottoman Empire to hand it over to our country. The agreement is clearly written. Metternich asked the waiter to bring documents and evidence, as well as the agreement with the Ottomans. There is no doubt about the authenticity of these things. Catholics in Bosnia have been persecuted for hundreds of years. The evidence collected by the church can be used to describe it, piled up like a mountain. Moreover, France's vigorous publicity in newspapers from various countries was not useless. The ambassadors and members of the mission here all learned more or less about the situation in Bosnia from newspapers. As for the authenticity of the agreement, even the representatives of the Ottoman Empire did not question it, so it goes without saying. Let's talk about the agreement to exchange Belgrade for East Bosnia. This was proposed by the Serbian government and the legitimate Grand Duke, your son Mikhail. This agreement has also been recognized by Sultan Mejid. What else do you have? Is it easy to say, faced with mountains of irrefutable evidence, all Miloš has left is to act wildly? I said, you used dirty methods to force the Ottoman Sultan, the Parliament of 17, and Mikhail. My lords, believe me, what I said is true. Austria is not worthy of trust. Allies, it will only reap the benefits. Here are the letters that Millis has written over the years to the Ottoman Sultan, the Russian Tsar, the emperor of our country, and the Karadzior whose head he beheaded. Each letter is full of flattery, and even more so, it describes countless dirty and despicable methods I happen to have a copy here, so please take a look. Metternich was well prepared, and with a snap of his fingers, stacks of letters were made public. Do you have anything else to say? Before Millis could speak, Metternich said again, speaking of reaping the benefits, our country sent an attack on the coast of Egypt and sent 6,000 soldiers on an expedition to Syria. This is obvious to all. How should you explain your slander against our country? I didn't slander. Before Millis finished speaking, Austrian guards rushed into the venue, and naturally he didn't have the chance to say what he wanted to say. To be honest, Metternich really didn't expect Gizet to make such a move, but now Austria has no leverage to threaten France. Fortunately, France had made preparations in advance, otherwise he would have been in an embarrassing situation of being jointly intervened by the four countries to return the territory. However, one wave after another, the British dropped another bombshell. Britain was preparing to lease Crete for 99 years, and at the same time, establish a Mediterranean fleet to better maintain peace in the Near East. The British intention is very clear. They not only want the Mediterranean to become a bathtub, but also want to make this bathtub a British bathtub. The British pulled 31 battleships directly from the docks of the North Sea Fleet. Representatives of all countries knew that Britain's maritime power was powerful, but they did not expect it to be so terrifying. You must know that they have just dispatched 10 battleships to Asia and North America, while the main force of the British Royal Navy is still in the North Sea. Compared with the 2 battleships that were sunk before, they were just a drop in the bucket of the Royal Navy. Gizet couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and then wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Fortunately, the French fleet did not go out in full force to encircle Simon's fleet with the Egyptian fleet. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the mistakes of the Battle of Trafalgar would have happened again. The size of the British Navy is so beyond everyone's imagination that Nisholov couldn't help but feel a cold sweat for Russia. Faced with such a powerful maritime force, can the Sevastopol fortress really stop everything? Perhaps the best way to protect yourself is to compromise with the British. Obviously this man will go further and further on the road of being pro-British. Metternich also began to doubt whether the Austrian Empire would be able to overtake Britain at sea 50 years later. Cunning was very satisfied with the expressions of the great powers, but he did not expect that his own navy actually hid so many deadly weapons. Chapter 219 Hegemony. Distribution of the Royal Navy and the number of main ships. The North Sea Fleet has 35 battleships, including 10 first-class battleships, 10 second-class battleships, and 15 third-class battleships. The Mediterranean Fleet has 31 battleships, including 1 first-class battleship, 4 second-class battleships, and 26 third-class battleships. The West African Fleet has 17 battleships, including 1 second-class battleship and 16 third-class battleships. The Indian Ocean Fleet has 25 battleships, including 1 first-class battleship, 2 second-class battleships, and 22 third-class battleships. The South American Fleet has 8 battleships, all of which are third-tier battleships. The West Indies has 5 battleships, including 1 second-tier battleship and 4 third-tier battleships. The Atlantic Fleet has 10 battleships, including 1 second-tier battleship and 9 third-tier battleships. The Pacific Fleet has 6 battleships, all of which are third-class battleships. The Cape Fleet has 5 battleships, including 1 second-tier battleship and 4 third-tier battleships. When the full picture of the British Royal Navy emerged, whether it was the Grand Eastern Fleet, 25 ships, that the French were proud of, or the Russian Black Sea Fleet, 40 ships, they were all eclipsed. Austrian Adriatic Fleet, 21 battleships, including captured Egyptian ships. The British Royal Navy will be permanently stationed on Crete, which will undoubtedly be a heavy blow to Austria, France, and Russia, which are spying on Mediterranean hegemony. The treaty signed between the British and the Ottomans was also clearly written, and its overwhelming naval power made people dare not refute it. At this time, Helmut's fiasco was forgotten like an insignificant episode, replaced by awe of British maritime supremacy. Everything that Britain lost before was regained today. Of course, this will not satisfy these Anglo-Saxons. The British Royal Navy will hand over all 10 captured Egyptian warships to the Ottoman Empire. Ever since, the finger was pointed at the Austrian Empire again. Your Excellency, I think your country should return the captured warships and prisoners of war. What do you think? As soon as these words came out, the temperature in the venue dropped sharply. Everyone felt that a catastrophe was imminent for Austria. Britain had both a strength advantage and a moral advantage. If it surrendered its fleet, the Ottoman Empire would have 29 battleships, which could completely compete with the French Grand Eastern Fleet and the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Compete with each other. Then everything is back to where it started. There is no substantial loss for other powers. Perhaps it is enough to sacrifice Austria's interests. Obviously the Austrian Empire has been isolated. Going your own way will inevitably arouse the resentment of the great powers. But if you give up the Austrian navy, you may never get ahead. Metternich now began to regret that he had placed all his treasure on the British. He always thought that, as long as he obeyed the British in everything, he could gain their trust. Historically, Metternich desperately followed the footsteps of Britain during the Turkish-Egyptian War. As a result, he lost both his people and money, and Vienna changed from a conference capital to a club capital. For a gambler, it is common to make wrong bets. The key to becoming a master lies in being able to stop losses in time. Obviously Metternich was such a master. When Napoleon's empire was at its peak, he chose to let Francis II marry his daughter to seek peace. After Napoleon defeated Russia, Metternich immediately cut his losses and beat the sinking dog, and successfully established the Vienna system after the war, maintaining the dignity of the Austrian Empire for nearly 30 years. I think there is a problem with your wording. Those are the spoils of our country. It was the Austrian Empire that rescued those craftsmen, not captured them. If any of them are willing to return to Egypt, we will not force them to stay. There is no doubt that Metternich did not intend to hand over the fleet, because after being betrayed repeatedly by the British, he finally decided to completely change his original expectations and instead used stop loss as a new strategy for the Austrian side to continue the talks. Maybe Archduke Franz is right. He thought in his heart, the British cannot be an ally. They can only be business partners at most. If this partner does not abide by the rules, the best thing to do is to fight back. Franz said this about Britain: "Your Excellency, I think you should consider peace in the Near East. Those fleets do not belong to Austria in the first place. They are the property of the Ottoman Empire. If the Ottoman Empire can regain the warships captured by our country and your country, then the power of the Mediterranean region will restore balance." Faced with Metternich's tough attitude, Canning softened first, because what the British Parliament asked for was to rebalance the power in the Mediterranean region, not to let him provoke another war, although the language was still strong, from the subtle changes in tone, body movements, etc. Metternich had noticed that the other party was not completely sure, so he answered even more forcefully: "Then it would be better to hand over all General Helmut's fleet and General Simon's fleet to the Ottoman Empire, and at the same time limit the number of warships in each country, so that the maritime power in the Mediterranean can truly be balanced." Canning was immediately rendered speechless. If the British really handed over the two fleets to the Ottoman Empire, there is no doubt that Russia would lose its Black Sea hegemony. Restricting the number of warships was undoubtedly a fatal blow to France, which was prospering on the colonial road at this time. The Ottomans would be very happy. At least they could extend the life of their empire for another few decades. Although Metternich did not say it explicitly, he evoked the deepest fears in Russia and France. Although Nasrallah and Guizot were both pro-British, they also knew the consequences if British power continued to expand in the Near East. The Ottomans were Britain's little brother at this time. The stronger the former, the harder it would be for the great powers to benefit from it. However, the British are an exception, because they have the strongest industry and the closest relationship with the Ottomans. The Austrians' possession of the Egyptian heritage will not cause damage to the stability of the region. On the contrary, if the Ottomans obtain the Egyptian heritage, and with the support of the British, it will be easy to break the balance in the Near East and even the Mediterranean region. The great powers began to discuss countermeasures one after another. Upon seeing this, Canning quickly changed his strategy, avoiding Metternich's sharp edge, and throwing another sweet date: if the Austrian Empire is willing to hand over its fleet, the Ottoman Empire is willing to exchange the province of Tripoli. Of course, if he were replaced by Palmerston, he would definitely use his own advantages to threaten Austria with war, and Metternich might not be able to deal with it easily. But Canning does not have Palmerston's courage. At the same time, he is also a person with a bottom line, unlike the latter who can use all his strength to achieve his goals without any scruples. Tripoli has been introduced before. After the slave trade was banned, it was considered a bad land at this time, and it was close to Egypt. It was actually not controlled by the Ottoman Sultan for a long time. The Send Sultan became the emperor of the country and only paid a symbolic tax every year, which had become a big problem. Franz knew the value of Tripoli, but people at the time did not know it, including Prince Metternich, exchanging a desert for a fleet. Unless the yellow sand there turns into gold. Metternich had a tough attitude, but your country agreed to exchange prisoners of war. Cunning said, our country agreed to return prisoners of war, but it did not say that it would return weapons. Will your country also return weapons to prisoners when they release them? As soon as Metternich said this, he was unanimously approved by the ambassadors of various countries. This was not because what he said made sense, but because it was in their interests for Austria to win. The title is wrong. If you can't change it, let's make do with it. It should be British hegemony in the Mediterranean. Chapter 220. Some are happy and some are sad. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz had been paying attention to the dynamics of the five-nation meeting, but when he learned that Britain was going to lease Crete and build a naval base on it, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. What the hell is the Mediterranean fleet? Is it because of myself? The world line changes again. But historically, Britain did establish a Mediterranean fleet, but it would be delayed by a few years. The naval bases were not on Crete, but on Gibraltar and Malta. Although Metternich retained the Adriatic fleet, Greek Island and the Mediterranean fleet were embedded in the territory of the Near East like an ale. This five-nation conference allowed the territories Austria gained from the Ottomans and Serbia to be recognized by the great powers. However, this does not help Austria's economic situation. Instead, it requires a lot of resources and funds to develop and protect them. Although it may seem that the gains outweigh the losses for the time being, the impact of this move will continue to affect the stability of the entire empire for the next 100 years. The most important thing for Austria at this time should be the Adriatic fleet. This fleet can save Austria at least 5 to 6 years after the Turkish-Egyptian War. Friedrich also successfully became the first minister of the newly established Navy and Colonial Department. Of course, he himself felt mixed feelings. He was happy that this new appointment allowed him to focus more on the development of the Navy, but he was worried that colonization was not his strength. Obviously, he would have to rely more on Franz's help in the future. The first task Franz gave him was to conduct cordial and friendly gunboat diplomacy with the natives of the Ivory Coast after the Adriatic fleet was refitted. I believe that those indigenous people will be very willing to do business with Austria and then enter into some exclusive treaties to exclude other forces from the Ivory Coast as soon as possible. Historically, the French began to show interest in the area in April 1840, and in the following months, they successively induced the local chiefs to sign monopoly agreements, and then designated it as their own colony. But now Franz will take the first step. The Ivory Coast is also a mess at this time, and the French will not confront Austria for this bad land. Ivory Coast can first be used as a supply point for Austria in West Africa. When this land develops, the Austrian navy will definitely be different from what it used to be. If the French want to get involved in this land, they must carefully weigh their own interests. As for the Tripoli promise to the Caramanli family, Franz felt that he could train the rescued Egyptian craftsmen and civilians into soldiers. The British did not fulfill their promise, which was completely expected by Franz. So from the beginning he sent people to train and arm the Egyptians. Of course they won't do it now. After all, the British are still watching, but they can send those Egyptians to Tripoli in batches. The language and culture of Egyptians and Tripoli are similar, so it's not difficult to blend in. In view of Allah's brutality, those Egyptians would not want to return to their hometown, and going to Tripoli to win a living space for themselves may be their best choice. As for when the Caramanli family can regain their homeland, it depends on them. The British Mediterranean fleet is formidable, but choosing Crete as a naval base is not a good idea. Crete's strategic location is important, but it also means that it will attract more enemies and competitors. Being surrounded by the sea means that it will face threats from all directions. For example, France, which has always regarded the Mediterranean as an inland sea, and Russia, which wants to break out of the Black Sea, face the biggest enemy at this time. Britain. It is conceivable that the three countries will definitely launch a naval competition in the near future, and Britain's energy will be greatly affected, weakening its power in the East. There is no end to the naval equipment competition. With the speed of naval iteration in the 19th century, if the British want to continue to maintain their maritime superiority, the amount of money they need to invest will be astronomical. In this five-nation meeting, Britain did not succeed in dismantling Russia's hegemony in the Straits, which was something neither Britain nor the Ottomans wanted to see. The next time the Strait issue will be resolved will be in 1841. If Russia seeks to extend the special agreement on the Russian-Turkish alliance, they must seek allies in order to fight against Britain. Similarly, the British also needed allies to restrain Russia's development in the Near East. In order to deal with the new crisis, the Ottomans also needed new allies. Austria, a powerful country with a special geographical location, will become the target of wooing by the countries in the Near East. If a country wants to develop, a good external environment is essential. As a target that all three parties need to win over. Austria can naturally enjoy a good time. At this time, France has given up the burden of Egypt and will set its sights on North America, Central America, Africa, Asia, and Spain. The endless civil war in Spain exhausted the three countries of Britain, France, and Spain. Especially mountain guerrilla warfare is torture for both the offensive and defensive sides. At first, the Carlists fought several good battles with the help of the British, knocking the Spanish government troops and French troops off guard, and turning them around, and for a time regained most of the northern area. Even Bilbao, the place where the First Carlist War ended, was captured by the rebels. However, the good times did not last long. Queen Regent Christina wooed liberals and enlightened nobles and hired troops from abroad to help the government forces fight. At the same time, France also changed its generals again and strengthened its support for Spain. The Carlists were once again driven back into the Pyrenees, but it was obviously wishful thinking to eliminate the rebels with British support behind them. The French and Spanish government forces encountered unprecedented fierce resistance in the mountains, and they were surprised to find that the troops fighting them seemed to have a different group of people. Their feeling was correct. These people were trained by the British from Portugal and were originally intended to be sent to the west to revolt. However, due to the tight war in the north, they were sent to northern Spain. The endless tug of war between the two sides completely destroyed Spain's economy. In desperation, Queen Regent Christiana could only borrow money from France. At first, the French thought this was a good opportunity to control Spain, but as the arrears increased and the war went poorly, France's sunk costs also increased. Now France has no way to accept the defeat in Spain. The defeat in Egypt has caused them heavy losses. If it happens again, it will most likely lead to a huge crisis of confidence. The jungles of Central America also made it difficult for the French army. The indigenous guerrillas did not cause many casualties to the French army, but some soldiers were acclimatized, and cholera and dysentery became rampant in the military camp. In addition, some soldiers also suffered from syphilis due to their bad behavior. Mosquitoes and venomous snakes are more deadly than bullets here, and the Central American Federation can't actually come up with anything decent to pay the commission. Many of their so-called lands are harassed by guerrillas. France has invested 30,000 troops in Central America, but has been unable to recover the cost, making some financiers and politicians restless. And Louis Philippe happened to be soft-hearted. He ordered the French government to colonize while fighting a war, just like it did with Algeria. Chapter 221 Arrangement. Just when Franz was still thinking about the next colonial plan of the Austrian Empire, the British, unwilling to be left alone, took action again. They did not give up the plan for a Jewish state. Although the Ottoman Sultan Mejid was reluctant, they still sold large tracts of land in Syria and near Jerusalem to the Jews at a very low price. Deliberately exaggerated by the British and a group of Zionists. The land of Syria was described as a promised land full of golden milk. Even the Russian newspaper, which hates Jews the most, published this news, but they gave too much. In addition, almost all European newspapers in Austria, France, Germany, and Spain reported the same news one after another. When Jews in various European countries saw the news in the newspapers, they were overjoyed and moved their families. At first, politicians from various countries were worried whether the Jews would take their wealth with them if they left, and whether stores would close on a large scale, leading to an economic depression point. As a result, the stock prices of many countries fell, and Franz decided to buy the bottom, but he was not the only one who sensed the opportunity. Franz soon discovered that the major financial groups were also busy buying at the bottom, and the most aggressive ones were the Jew Solomon Rothschild has been silent for a long time. He saw the opportunity and decided to silently buy the bottom. At this time, he just wanted to make a fortune quietly and did not want to continue to provoke the Austrian royal family. In fact, there is a question in Solomon's mind that he has never understood. Does the Habsburg royal family really regard him as an opponent? Otherwise, why would they target him everywhere? If they regard him as an opponent, then why don't they beat him up? Solomon hid in a luxury suite at the Stefani Hotel and had been watching the stock market transactions with trepidation until he got reliable news. The royal family began to buy at the bottom. He took a deep breath and invested a large amount of money in the stock market. As the Jews left, a large number of shops were put up for sale. But what people didn't expect was that the expected panic did not spread. Instead, a large number of nobles, elites, and small businessmen were frantically buying. Not only the shops, but also the markets they vacated. Even the gangsters and killers were very busy. In order to build momentum for the Jewish state, Britain even sent battleships from the Mediterranean fleet to escort the Jews returning to Syria. Soon the first batch, about 12,000 Jews, returned to the place where their ancestors had lived. At this time, Israel had just experienced war and was devastated, looking like it was in dire straits, since the wealthy businessmen and dignitaries had already bought this land from the Ottoman Empire. The first thing the Jews did when they arrived in Israel was to hire some tribes that were easier to control and begin to expel the local tribes that were unwilling to leave. In a short period of time, they established schools, hospitals, their own government, and even an army to defend the land. However, there is still an absolute gap between the number of Jews and the number of local people. The Armenian genocide that should have occurred during the same period did not occur. The Armenian sheep ate the Ottoman crops and were let go after being paid a severe beating. Several influential Ottoman orders focused their experience on dealing with Israel, and they sent capable officers to infiltrate there. Among them, the leader of the Safavid order, the Lord of all changes, personally took action and vowed to drive the evil pagans out of their sacred territory. In the Ottoman palace, Majid was enjoying the sun and rain in the flower hall when suddenly a gloomy voice came from behind. "Your Majesty, I would like to see Gerhard." Gerhard's voice made people feel uncomfortable. Majid pushed the beauty in his arms away and threw away the half piece of rose cake that was left in his hand. "Everyone, go down." At this time, there was a concubine who was ignorant of current affairs and tried to act coquettishly with Majid. "Your Majesty, bury her." Majid's tone was indifferent, as if he was talking about something insignificant. Only then did the concubine realize the seriousness of the problem and immediately started shouting, "Your Majesty, please forgive me, I'm your favorite ma'am." "Shut her up," Majid ordered the palace steward. The old manager was very experienced and took out an object from his inner pocket and stuffed it into Mayam's mouth so that the other party could no longer scream. After that, the two eunuchs dragged the concubine away, and the other concubines and cooks were so frightened that they immediately fled the flower hall. Finally, there were only two eunuch guards, the palace steward, Majid, and Gerhard left in the entire flower hall. Gerhard is the spymaster under Majid. Even at noon, his body is still hidden in his hood, making it impossible to see his figure clearly. "What's the matter?" Majid held his forehead. This spymaster was quite capable, but he rarely brought good news. This time should be no exception. It would probably give him a headache. "The order has taken action. They are going to do something big in Israel." "What big thing can these old stubborn people do?" Majid said. "The leader of the cult will sacrifice 10,000 heretics and deprive them of everything." Gerhard said in a cold tone. Majid frowned. "When are they going to take action?" "They are planning to take action on Eid al-Adha." The Idalod Have Xianfang sect was February 5, 1840. The fanatical believers in the Ottoman Empire were not fools. They would not attack the Jews under the protection of the British. The senior leaders of the order believe that Britain's protection of the Jews is more to show off its strength than to sincerely want to help them, so this kind of military operation will not last long. Idalodha is a very important festival for the people of the Ottoman Empire. Taking action on this day can maximize the influence of the order under the suppression of 2 generations of sultans. The strength of the religious orders in the Ottoman Empire continued to decline. In order to compete with the government for faith, they had to choose to take desperate risks and put on a grand performance. And there are no better targets than these vampires, heretics, and invaders. They are really good at picking the time. Are they trying to prevent me from celebrating the festival? Majid joked. However, Gerhard didn't answer and seemed a little embarrassed. At this time, the palace manager came out to smooth things over. Those damn lunatics just like to cause problems for the Sultan. They should all be arrested and stoned to death. Stone punishment is a relatively cruel punishment. It is not only cruel in the execution method, but also in requiring the victim's family members to watch. It is a very cruel process. People who are stoned to death usually have difficulty leaving their bodies with their faces intact. What should we do? Gerhard asked. Don't worry about it. I hate those damn locusts too. When those old stubborns finish taking care of the locusts, and you hand them over to the British, it will be considered an apology to those infidels, Majid said. In fact, Megid's policy of ethnic equality was never fully implemented within the Ottoman Empire, and even led to growing gaps between some ethnic groups. But the appearance of the Jews at this time inadvertently saved a group of Christians who were about to become victims. Chapter 222 Rumors. Schönbrunn Palace. Franz's study. Jenny placed a bulging envelope on Franz's desk. What's this, Mr. Solomon Rothschild's bribe? If I don't take something from him, how can any smart person believe what I say? Franz nodded and then noticed that Jenny seemed to have new earrings. What is that? Jenny snorted. Mean. Then he took off the earrings and placed them on the envelope. Franz put the earrings into a delicate box, closed the lid, and handed them to Jenny solemnly. I gave this to you. Jenny opened the box and put the earrings back on. You brat, I haven't seen you for a few days, and you're still trying to tease me. With that said, he walked around the table and sat directly on Franz's lap. Ah, you teasing me? No, I just think it's not good for you to take the stolen goods sent by Solomon, so I'll give them to you again. Franz replied. You are still too young. Jenny deliberately said in Franz's ear just when Franz thought the other party's teasing was over. Jenny shook the wallet in her hand. Franz snatched it away. When will you change your petty theft habit? Why change? This is a survival skill. Jenny retorted. Ah, you from a noble family? Do you still need to learn this? Franz asked with some confusion. Aren't you now an exiled noble? Jenny said with some resentment. Do you want a title? I can help you. In no mood. Okay, how are the returns in the stock market? About 15%. Very little. It's quite a lot. This is millions of florins, which is equivalent to the income of a small country for half a year. Jenny has refreshed her understanding of money several times by Franz's side. She used to think that loan sharks were the most profitable industry, and that kings and emperors often had to borrow money to survive. Looking at it now, it is easier for those in power to make money. The borrowing behavior of those in high positions does not necessarily mean that they have no money, but it is definitely a sign that their desires are hard to satisfy. Just like the little guy in front of me, I really don't know when he will be satisfied, but come to think of it, compared to Franz's dream, the money is really insignificant. But that dream was too illusory, and Jenny still didn't know whether Franz was joking or if he really wanted to do that. What about the construction plan of the Semmering Railway? Has it been approved? Franz asked. Are you talking about a reinforced concrete structure? Experts from the Austrian Engineering Association looked at it and said this is really a genius design. 2 materials, cement and steel bars, have appeared for a long time, but no one has thought of using them for decades. It's a genius idea to put them together and use them as building materials. Ajani seemed a little excited when she spoke because she still remembered how those experts went from contempt to admiration to tears. So, when will the railway be completed? In 2 to 3 years. Although this new structure can solve the viaduct problem, the terrain is still very complex, and engineers need enough time to overcome this problem. Ajani paused here and continued, there is another problem now, that is, the quality of the cement produced in Austria is not good, and the hardness does not meet the standards in all aspects. If you want to complete the viaduct, you must buy British Portland cement. Portland cement, yes, a high-strength cement. But the British kept the formula secret, and it was expensive. Add in the shipping costs, and it was astronomical. After Franz learned about the ratio of cement materials at this time, he found that he was still too proud. Modern cement should be called silicate cement, and he searched for a long time in the formula, and found nothing wrong. So he had to offer a reward to develop a cement formula. According to Franz's estimation, the reason why Austrian cement was not as good as British cement should be a ratio issue. Maybe the silicon content is not enough. Maybe some iron or aluminum should be added. In short, Franz wrote down his conjecture, and the rest will be left to the professional scientists to study the ratio. The delay in opening the railway in Trieste made Franz very annoyed, so he had to go out and find a way to speed it up personally. The newspapers in Vienna have recently been full of news about Friedrich's army's surprise attack on Alexandria and Franz's army's recapture of Belgrade. There is no country that doesn't like to show off its military prowess, and Austria is no exception. It didn't like to mention war before, because it suffered repeated defeats. Nowadays, we advocate war every day, because we have won the war. Although this trend is not good, it is undoubtedly a shot in the arm for this country that has been silent for too long. Whether it was defeating Egypt and grabbing its fleet or recapturing Belgrade, it was a victory worth celebrating for the Austrian Empire. Although Franz encountered little resistance along the way to regain Belgrade, the editors of the newspapers would not write this. How can a political victory come as quickly as a military victory? As a result, this political victory turned into a trap when the stupid Prince Metternich fell into a trap. The heroic Archduke Franz led his army to defeat the evil Ottomans, cut off the opponent's beard with a sword, and saved Gulas story. Don't think it's ridiculous. In the textbooks of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was said with certainty that Emperor Franz led the Hussar charge and killed dozens of enemy soldiers in the Battle of Solferino. After that, the legend about Franz became more and more outrageous. Although he didn't care much about it, with the help of caring people, the whole incident was developing in a strange direction. Archduke Franz is the illegitimate son of Madame Sophie and Napoleon II. An extremely vicious rumor appeared in the newspaper, although the newspaper was immediately ordered to close down, and all newspaper staff from the editor to reporters to the workers responsible for typesetting and printing were detained for secret interrogation. The rumor still spread like wildfire. This rumor caused all the glory that Franz had previously received to disappear immediately, and even the reputation of the Habsburg family was damaged. Franz was not interested in verifying the authenticity of this rumor. He just wanted to know why a rumor created in Vienna had not found its source for so long. Franz faced such great pressure for the first time since time travel, because this rumor is tantamount to denying the legitimacy of his succession to the throne. Franz looked in the mirror and looked at his chestnut hair. It should not be related to the black hair of the Napoleon family. Just when he breathed a sigh of relief, he was bumped into by Ajani, and Franz didn't hide it. Napoleon's hair was black, right? Ajani said with some embarrassment. Archduke Franz. I checked. There are several versions. Maroon, Dr. Kubisset, crimson gold, Denis Davidoff, brown, British Captain Ross, and Napoleon II has Habsburg blood. This made Franz, who still wanted to take a blood test for a blood test, suddenly speechless. Chapter 223 Vicious. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz was still at his desk planning the future of the famous Austria as usual. A maid knocked on Franz's door. Archduke Franz, Madame Sophie wants to see you. Come in. After Franz finished speaking, he went to open the door. "Hello, mother." "Hello, Franz. Can I come in and have a chat with you?" "Okay." Franz replied. Mrs. Sophie waved to the maids and guards behind her, who wisely exited the room and closed the door. "Franz, you don't seem to be in a hurry." Mrs. Sophie looked like she hated iron. "Should I be anxious, mother?" Franz hugged Mrs. Sophie and rubbed his face on her chest. A feeling that was both familiar and unfamiliar made Mrs. Sophie very angry. "Why are you so coquettish?" Mrs. Sophie was so angry that she was speechless for a while. She looked around and finally she found a teacup and took a big sip. Mrs. Sophie no longer cared about her image at this time and said with a sigh of relief, "You are the biological child of me and your father, so you don't have to worry about that. But this rumor is very vicious. Not only does he want to kill you, but he also wants our family to disappear from this world." "Mom, who do you think is happiest when our family loses power?" "I have offended so many people, and you have offended a lot of people too. How could I have guessed this?" Franz facepalmed. "Then, let me put it another way. Who is most beneficial to our family's loss of power? The most advantageous?" Mrs. Sophie suddenly thought of a very terrible result. Queen Anna. Franz didn't answer, just making tea silently. "Why? That vicious woman." Mrs. Sophie was already gnashing her teeth in anger. "I have no evidence, but this matter is very unusual. Most of the things I do are done in the name of my father. If they want revenge, they should go to my father. But the other party just came to me, and spreading this rumor, when attention is at its highest, can be described as deliberate. Normally, Archduke Franz does not pay much attention to himself. Once the government takes strong measures, it can easily be eliminated. But this time is different. The entire country is in a kind of fanatical worship of heroes after victory, and those details are difficult for people outside the palace to know so clearly. If it was a national level frame up, the news would have spread abroad long ago. But even Austria's mortal enemy, the French, did not publish this news in their newspapers. It can never be the action of a certain country, but that bitch has no children, and the throne of Austria is even less likely to be inherited by the queen. What's the point of her doing this? Mrs. Sophie was puzzled by this. "Mother, do you know the story of Catherine the Great?" "Franz, you mean mother? There is a first time for everything. Before Queen Issa, no woman had inherited the throne of Austria." Franz's words made Mrs. Sophie break into cold sweat, but her heart was still restless. "But what should we do? Tell the emperor and let him depose the queen? Or let Grand Duke Louis directly lead the troops and let the queen die unexpectedly?" "Mother, what Austria needs at this time is stability," Franz said flatly. "But if this continues, your legitimacy will be questioned, and these dirty remarks will accompany you throughout your life." Mrs. Sophie knew very well the horror of rumors. That is, people don't care whether they are true or not, they just choose what you like. Franz also knew that, even if Luz opened his stomach to show others, no one would care. The best way to eliminate rumors is to directly punish those who create rumors and those who spread rumors. "Don't worry, mother. Those who spread the rumor will be sentenced to hanging in the public square tomorrow. As for those who helped spread the rumor, they will all be exiled to Namibia and Chenla." "What if someone spreads rumors again?" Mrs. Sophie said worriedly. "Continue to hang and exile, and only when your life is at stake can those who do evil things be shut up completely," Franz said. "How did you catch those who spread the rumors?" "The secret police searched the whole city, but couldn't find them. The Bavarian Mutual Aid Association also helped find them for several days. Even the Vienna Chamber of Commerce and Industry offered a reward of 500,000 florins, but there was no clue." "Don't worry, mother. The person who spread the rumor will be dead after the execution tomorrow. Anyone who is an accomplice can also be sentenced to death." Franz's tone was cold and murderous. The real rumor mongers may have left Vienna a long time ago, or even left the European continent. It would be extremely difficult to catch them. But there are a lot of death row prisoners, and people just want to see the excitement. As for the owners of that newspaper, they all took advantage of the censorship system, and at the same time, touched the country's bottom line. They deserve to be punished. Just to damage the reputation of the royal family and send them into exile in Namibia is very merciful. Of course, if someone jumped out and admitted that he was the one who spread the rumor, Franz wouldn't mind hanging one more person. As for the mastermind behind the scenes, Empress Anna, and her lover, the emperor's chief advisor Karl von Sluter, Franz felt that he could let them go once for the sake of the stability of the Austrian Empire. After all, although these clowns were vicious, they were nothing more than a few. The drama of palace fighting is nothing to worry about. But what should I do about that bitch? Just let her go like this? Your kindness will kill you sooner or later. Mrs. Sophie obviously didn't want to let Queen Anna go, and she didn't care, even if her roommates were fighting. Mother, we don't have enough evidence. Franz still looked indifferent, which made Mrs. Sophie angry and funny. Why did I give birth to such an invulnerable thing like you? I really want to ruin your reputation. This scandal alone has hurt the royal family very much. If another queen dies mysteriously, it will definitely not be a good thing for the country. What's more, I have nothing to do with them in the first place. I believe they will get over it after this time. Return. Different from Franz's optimism. Although Mrs. Sophie could not cause Queen Anna to die mysteriously, there was no problem in letting several maids around her disappear before figuring out the matter. However, Madame Sophie soon became angry because the two maids brought from Savoy to Queen Anna quickly admitted the fact of spreading rumors under coercion and inducement. It was Empress Anna and her chief advisor Karl von Sluter who jointly planned it. They sold the rumors to newspapers and then hid in the palace to avoid arrest. Framing Archduke Franz is only the first step in the plan. Later, Archduke Maximilian and Archduke Ludwig will be framed. The purpose is to drive Mrs. Sophie and her family out of the palace. They even hired gangsters and gunmen to disguise themselves. A mob formed to assassinate him. Soon, two maids who mysteriously disappeared were found in a septic tank on the outskirts of the city. To be precise, they should be two incomplete bodies. Their identities could only be identified from their clothing and belongings. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224 The Culprit. Vienna, Hofburg Palace. A box full of stinking filth was delivered to Queen Anna's palace. The pungent smell made the stomachs of those around him churn. You all go out. After hearing Queen Anna's words, everyone immediately left the room, as if they had been granted amnesty. Only Karl von Sluter, Empress Anna, and her chamberlain, Baron Diel, were left in the room. No. Baron Diel quickly stopped him when he saw Queen Anna putting her hand on the box in front of her. With the size of the box in front of me, it is impossible to fit an adult in it. Two of the four maids beside Queen Anna have been killed, and Baroness Friety broke her neck while riding a horse yesterday. Today someone found this box in Lady Dora's garden. Mrs. Dora had been missing for almost a month. She was Queen Anna's nanny. They had been together day and night for more than 30 years. Queen Anna wanted to confirm this anyway, and Baron Diel pried open the box with a crowbar. Queen Anna closed her eyes and took a deep breath and looked at the box. Inside was a body that was no longer human. All the bones in the body seemed to have been smashed. An extremely twisted elephant shape was stuffed into the box. The time of death should be more than a week. The swollen body and the foul smell prove all this. Fortunately, what was inside was not the body of Lady Dora, but what frightened her was that what was inside was actually the envoy of her cousin King Alberto of Sardinia, the Count of Monterey. Queen Anna looked horrified, which seemed nothing wrong to Sluter and Baron Diel. It was not unusual for them to panic after seeing such a terrifying scene. There was also a letter in the box, which was left by Mrs. Dora to Queen Anna. The letter said, "I hope the Queen will always be healthy and beautiful, cherish the life in front of her, and go to the New World, to retire and cut off her ties with the Savoy royal family." It was the last thing she could do. However, the death of Count Monterey made her feel complicated. Because the interactions between Queen Anna and the Count of Monterey were kept secret, not even her two lovers knew about it. Although there was nothing wrong with the handwriting of this letter, it was the last one. They had agreed before that if the word forever appeared in the first sentence of the letter, it meant that the two would be separated forever, so the person who killed El Monterey was naturally not Mrs. Dora. What's more important is that, now that the other party knows the identity of Count Monterey, it is easy to guess who Queen Anna is helping due to the formation of the Apennine Customs Union by Austria at Franz's suggestion. The Kingdom of Sardinia's income dropped sharply, and it also felt strong pressure from the Austrian Empire. Carlo Alberto is not a man who will sit back and wait for death. He will do whatever it takes to keep his kingdom alive. Queen Anna of the Austrian Empire was Carlo Alberto's cousin, and they both belonged to the Savoy royal family. Carlo Alberto had a bold idea, which was to kill the orthodox heir of the Habsburg family and instead let his cousin give birth to an heir with Savoy royal blood. The dove takes over the magpie's nest, just like the Habsburg family once did. Although Emperor Ferdinand I was unable to give birth to a child, the queen was in good health, and Alberto knew that his cousin had been secretly in love with him, but the first step was to get rid of Austria's orthodox heir as a person who lives in the harem all year round. It is not easy to create a vicious rumor. The empress soon found a perfect opportunity. The Austrian government was seeking to increase the influence of the royal family. They selected the future heir of the empire, Archduke Franz. Just when the news that Archduke Franz led his army to recapture Belgrade spread, people's attention to this Archduke reached an unprecedented height. At this time, Queen Anna sent her two most trusted maids abroad from Savoy. They lived up to expectations and quickly found a newspaper that was willing to cooperate. After the transaction was completed, the two maids returned to the palace to avoid subsequent arrests. However, what the queen did not expect was that the government responded so quickly and then used thunderous means to impose heavy penalties on those who spread the rumors. The expected huge wave did not appear, and then people around her mysteriously disappeared one after another. She knew that the other party had not only suppressed the rumors, but also discovered herself as the culprit. Even the Count of Monterey was found. Queen Anna feels that she is very innocent. She has long pale golden hair, brown eyes, and has the confidence to not lose to the queens of other countries in terms of temperament and figure. But Emperor Ferdinand I was obviously not blessed to endure this. He preferred meatballs, literally, to women. Maria Anna's father had no sons, so he doted on his daughters. Anna and her sisters enjoyed a very free life. Until 1830, her uncle Carlo Fellis regarded her as a gift to please the Austrian Emperor Francis II, and married her to the future Emperor Ferdinand I. After the death of his uncle, his cousin Alberto became Queen Anna's only support. Naturally, she went all out for her cousin's entrustment. However, she had never expected that this situation would occur today. Her Royal Highness the Queen. Your Royal Highness the Queen. Slot shouted, noticing that the Queen was a little distracted. Anna had just come to her senses when Slot asked again, "Does Your Highness know this person?" "I don't know you." Queen Anna was like an innocent little white rabbit at this time, with tears still in her dark grey eyes. Of course no one believed this kind of nonsense, but Slot and Barandil pretended to believe and care at the same time. They all felt that Queen Anna had been conquered by them. The difference was that Barandil had guessed the mastermind behind this series of assassinations, while Slot felt that this was just a jealous internal fight. Barandil felt that the mastermind behind these tragedies was Mrs. Sophie. After all, there were only a handful of people who could carry out kidnappings and assassinations in the Hofburg Palace. Others would not abuse this right even if they could, but Mrs. Sophie would not care so much, otherwise she would not have the elegant title of the only man in the Habsburg family. Although Barandil didn't know why the other party had the ability to cause trouble in the palace, but he didn't attack Queen Anna. This proved that he was safe only by the Queen's side. In fact, Queen Anna was not popular in the court. First of all, her German and French were very poor. Secondly, she did not bear children for Ferdinand I. Although everyone knew that the emperor was not good, they could not say it, so all the blame was placed on the Queen. Baron Slot believed that it was impossible for his seamless plan to be discovered so quickly. The only explanation was that Barandil was up to something. As for the reason, of course it was jealousy, and there was also the question of who would be the royal husband after helping Queen Anna control the government. Of course, what he has to consider at this time is not what will happen in the future, but how to save his life now. Dill is the queen's attendant and has a powerful guard at his disposal. Point. That guy could kill all the maids she trusted around the queen, and he would definitely not be merciful to his competitor. Under the guidance of this thought, Slot decided to leave the palace immediately and then seek ways to get rid of his opponent. Chapter 225 Assassination. After the secret conversation, Karl von Slot left the palace in a hurry. As the emperor's chief advisor, his salary was not low, but it could not support the luxurious life he wanted. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but fall into a dream. A well-dressed young coachman was sitting in front of a luxury carriage drawn by 4 solid color horses. 3 or 5 beautiful lovers were surrounding him in the carriage, and he was accompanied by 2 traveling with 10 capable escorts. That kind of life is simply perfect. Returning to reality, Slot looked at the black carriage in front of him, the 4 lifeless variegated horses, the slovenly old coachman, and the 2 younger members of the family who had lost their clang. He sighed and stepped on helplessly. Got on the carriage. In the carriage, Slot was still studying how to bring down Barandil and what method could be used to drive the Franz family out of Vienna. The carriage was driving on a deserted street at night. Suddenly, the horse neighed and came to a sudden stop. Slot hit his forehead and blood flowed profusely. What's going on? Why did you stop the car? My head. Hiss. But before he could wait for the coachman and the guard to reply, huge shocks followed. A huge log hit the carriage directly. Baron Slot hurriedly escaped from the carriage, and then a high-speed carriage rushed towards him. At the same time, Barandil, who had been in ecstasy all night in the brocade tent, decided to go out for some air. He lit a cigarette and savored the aftertaste of the scene. Although Queen Anna is 36 years old, her charm is still there, and her performance in some aspects is still a stunner. You must know that smoking is prohibited in all public places in Vienna, let alone the palace. However, Barandil felt that he had this right. After all, even the emperor's women were his playthings, not to mention the mill. As the emperor's residence, the Hofburg Palace was already heavily guarded, and the successive murders of the maids around the queen caused the defense level to skyrocket. Of course, the secret between him and the queen cannot be discovered. At the same time, he has investigated every maid in the queen's palace to ensure that nothing is missing. Barandil believes that Mrs. Sophie's revenge will not be endless. The previous revenge was just a demonstration. The 2 sides will soon negotiate, and this crisis should be resolved. Dill is a smart man, but such people are often very conceited. He would not leave any evidence in the palace, and the cigarette butts were naturally placed in a special box. Barandil opened the box as usual, and prepared to put the cigarette in it to extinguish it. He smelled a strange smell, but he didn't take it to heart. But the moment the cigarette had entered the bottle, sparks ignited the nitroglycerine in it. Although the amount of nitroglycerine in the bottle was not large, its power was beyond the imagination of people at the time. A large amount of gas, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water vapor and oxygen is produced in a very short period of time, causing the temperature to rapidly rise to more than 3000 degrees Celsius and the pressure to be greater than 2000 atmospheres. With a bang, Barandil was thrown up by the explosion of the small bottle and hit the wall heavily. Countless glass fragments were embedded in his body. Queen Anna's guards heard the explosion and ran to check. They saw that the elegant baron was already a bloody mass of rotten flesh. He wanted to say something, but the blood foam blocked him. His throat could only make a grunting sound. Queen Anna heard about the assassination of Barandil, and she hurriedly came out to check. When she saw the miserable condition of the man in front of her, she fainted on the spot. The remaining people were a little at a loss, because Barandil was Queen Anna's attendant, and his family was considered a famous family in Austria. The death of such an important person in the palace should be reported immediately to the emperor and the regent council. However, the death of a naked man at the door of the queen's palace for no apparent reason makes people feel very troublesome and difficult to deal with. In order to assassinate this clever attendant, Ajani racked her brains. Although Franz's order was for her to kill Barandil and remove the queen's minions, but Ajani felt that it was still necessary to eradicate the problem, and of course she would not disobey Franz, so she found a way to get the best of both worlds. Since this thing called nitroglycerine is so dangerous, then if Barandil accidentally blows up the queen, all the blame will be borne by this dead man who cannot speak. Isn't it beautiful? Franz was not interested in knowing how Barandil died. He just didn't want this man to live in the world, not only because Barondeel spread rumors about himself, but also because this person might continue to bring shame to the royal family and the empire. To be honest, Franz didn't think Queen Anna had too much ambition. She must have been instigated by others to become what she is now. As for possible revenge, Franz did not think that Queen Anna had the ability to retaliate against himself and his family. Her rights came from the emperor, but Franz II had already restricted the emperor's rights when he died. So Franz felt that, as long as her claws were pulled out, there was no need to continue pursuing the matter, because the British on this world line are much more difficult to deal with than they thought. Millis, who was supposed to be taken to Sarajevo, has become Canning's guest at this time. Metternich's original intention was to use the hands of Vucic, Russian agent, to make Millis disappear from this world. However, after a series of transactions between Britain, Russia, and Austria, this Bork and Lubu fell into the hands of the British. Although Franz didn't think that a mere Serbia could threaten Austria, this fly that jumped sideways repeatedly was really annoying. Coupled with the support of the British, maybe Millis can really win the Serbian chicken contest. But the Ottomans and Russia also don't want this guy who jumps repeatedly to regain control of Serbia. As for the method of assassination, it is theoretically possible, but in practice it is too difficult to operate. The main reason is that people with many enemies are usually very careful, and Serbia is not within the Austrian Empire. The most important thing in assassination is intelligence. Only by fully understanding the target can the best plan be formulated. If an intelligence agency was really established for Millis, Franz felt that the gains would outweigh the losses, and he had neither the people nor the energy to do it now. The news of Karl von Slut's car accident did not attract the attention of government officials. The main reason is that the wheels of carriages in this era were still made of wood, without tires, and there were no shock absorbers such as springs. Accidents often occurred due to small bumps. In addition, no matter how humane horses are, they are still animals, and as animals they may suddenly lose control. If there was another carriage coming from another direction at this time, the accident could easily turn into a tragedy. And everyone knows that Baron Slot is a good-looking man. His carriage is obviously very worn out, and the coachman is old, but he still insists on riding in his own carriage without paying for one. A cab. The cost of maintaining a carriage in this era was very expensive, and many nobles could not afford it. For example, the famous French writer Mr. Balzac was once crushed by a four-wheeled four-seater carriage, and could not even pay a tip. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.